Robert, I'm dancing in the Matrix. Can you see me?
It's pretty awesome.
Why didn't they ever do like a music video with Neo and Trinity and Morpheus, right? You feel me on that?
Not at all. Not even the slightest. That'd be
Okay.
the worst music video I could ever possibly imagine.
Well, it doesn't matter whether you feel me on that one or not, because I know you're going to be feeling me in the chess show today. We are here with day 3. Let me tell you, day 3 is about to begin. Round 7 starts off with Robert's favorite clown, Komodo, taking on the clown, Mr. Fizbo. We got Chiron and Goal trying to avoid getting last place in the standings. Stockfish and Shredder should be an interesting one. Shredder has held his own in the middle of the pack, but then it really heats up in rounds 8 and 9 today, Robert, where Stockfish is faced off with both Komodo and Houdini, respectively, but in the reverse order that I just listed. So as we are getting set here, what has you most excited about computer-on-computer action, the PG kind?
Well, definitely not Chiron, as we talked about at length yesterday. It's been playing very poorly, so I don't want to see any of those games. Gull has been unimpressive as well, but of course Fizbo's back in action, so I gotta root for my buddy Fizbo. But you know, realistically speaking, the Stockfish has some huge matches today. Of course, it's in the lead, but with some tough challenges ahead, we'll see if we'll be able to pull it out and end the day victorious for the round robin stage.
Yeah, absolutely, and well said. And I am bringing up the games that have begun right about now, in honor of our favorite engine, Aboot. But even though we just talked about the fact that neither one of these engines has been super impressive for us today, we will still give them their due as Chiron and Goal are kicking off the action. If you're just tuning in the last 30 seconds, we showed you the schedule. We'll remind you of that. But the big news is that if you see the standings there above our analysis board, Houdini and Komodo are within striking distance of Stockfish heading into the last day. I think that's going to be what has everybody on the edge of their seat come about an hour and a half from now is will Houdini and Komodo pull an upset against Stockfish, who I think we could say, Robert, has had the slightly easier road up till now over Houdini and Komodo, just from the perspective that Houdini and Komodo have already played each other.
Yeah, absolutely. And Stockfish drilled Chiron, beat Boot, beat Fizbo, so it has beaten the lower half of the standings. So Stockfish has yet to play both Houdini and Komodo as the big matches, but also has not played Shredder, and perhaps Shredder can put up some resistance as well. But yeah, Stockfish has a huge lead. A 1-point lead is really difficult to overcome, but yes, with an easier schedule up to this point.
So one of the things that I want to talk about real quick, since we see another French defense on the board, Robert, and you and I have been, I think it's fair to say, a little bored or a little intrigued, either way you want to call it, with the amount of Frenches that have been played when these engines have their openings, their ECO axis turned off, what it is that they evaluate about the French as a good equalizing try for black. But we've done some stats and some data, and I'm just going to read it off for you here. We have had, well, I'm going to start actually, let's see here. I'm going to start with my favorite confirmed data, which is that we have had French games, Robert. We've had 28 French games. Make that 29 with the game that we see right in front of us. We've
make
had
it 30 because both
make it 30. That's right. We've also had 10 Queen's Gambit declines. We've had 3 Carocons, despite your harsh words for Fizbo on day 1. And we've had 5 Spanish games. Of course, there's a number of other openings mixed in there, a couple Sicilians. But overall, those have been leading the way with the French, a huge dominator, I guess, if you're talking about which opening is chosen. And so maybe at some point as we do more of these machine learning, artificial intelligence as it relates to chess discussions, we'll know more about what the developers can say, why the personality of these engines tends to choose the French when the ECO is turned off. But for now, that's it, and that's the data we have to back up what we've been saying. So when Robert and I say we've seen enough French for it to last us a lifetime, that's why. We've seen 5 times as much French as pretty much every other opening. So
that is very true. And another interesting stat, while this game is just getting underway, or these games, I should say, is that there have been a lot of decisive results. There have been 28 draws this far, 20 wins by the engine with white, and 12 wins by the engine with black. So we see 32 decisive games, 28 draws, and that's a pretty impressive decisive statistic there.
That's a great point, Robert. And I think not to call out the TCEC, which of course is a hugely popular, amazing event that Chess.com actually has a ton of interest and loves watching. So not in any way at all saying that the TCEC isn't as exciting, but the bottom line of chess games is we want to see decisive results, right? People love seeing action, Robert. They love seeing people win. And so, the TCEC being the much longer time control, the wins come few and far between, especially when you get Houdini and Stockfish, Houdini and Komodo and Stockfish going at it. So, but with the details of our tournament being that it is a rapid time control, so it's very similar to the Pro Chess League. It's similar to kind of the fun aspect that we get to see, where with less time on the clock, even for computers, we're seeing more decisive results. Again, without the openings book, we're seeing more decisive results. I think because that leads to some of the weaker engines, Robert, as we've criticized, getting kind of dubious positions out of the opening, right? But without their opening books, and that's allowed them to be outplayed in a way that they wouldn't normally. So I also, you take away draw offers and resignations, and that's kind of the format that we have here, that it's conducive to more exciting decisive results.
Yeah, for sure. And it's crazy that there's more excitement coming from the exchange French, which is probably the dullest opening that there is. But somehow things keep happening with these queen e2 checks, and we'll probably see this in the game between Goal and Chiron, where this queen e2 check, maybe block with the bishop on e6, knight g5 stuff, has led to some very interesting battles where there's a kind of asymmetrical pawn structure, and white has been taking advantage of those games.
Yeah, I don't have exact stats in front of us on what the decisive results have been in that line, but I think you and I, having done a lot of commentary on this has pretty much dominated our life for the last 72 hours. I think we can both say that white seems to be winning more of those games. Meaning I don't think black is getting a lot of positive decisive results there. So we'll see now that you can see on the main board here to your left with the evaluation right there on the left side of the screen. You can see that as you follow the games today, everybody, if this is your first time tuning in to the Chess.com Computer Chess Championship, we have a running Stockfish, the latest and greatest version, hooked up to our cloud analysis, all the support we can give that server to make it as accurate as possible. And you can see the moves and the depth and everything right there above the main board, along with the evaluation bar sliding up and down to the left, while Robert and I try to give you some human education on the right side of these analysis boards. So, all right, Robert, we're on the board now with knight to g5. The main game caught up to our analysis. Pretty easy for us to predict because we've seen it before. We've seen two approaches, though, after queen e7, right? We've seen the capture, and we've seen this move c4, which is designed to kind of attack the lead pawn. And for those who don't know that, positionally, if you can get the lead pawn to exchange, it makes the further, the backward or the isolated pawn in that chain even easier to target. But the other approach we saw was a move f4 really early, just cementing this e5 square to make sure that the e6 pawn was a huge weakness. Of those two approaches, Robert, which one has been your favorito that you've enjoyed with the tasty Dorito snack?
I really like the f4 approach because it makes black's life very difficult. There's no way to get this e5 move in. And we saw some games yesterday. I believe actually the stats are that white has 2 wins in this French exchange variation,
okay,
8 draws, and 2 losses by white. So that's pretty interesting to see. Yeah, it's been an even match. And so I prefer to, especially when you're looking at engines, limiting your opponent's space and then later using that and milking that advantage into a full point rather than allowing dynamic counterplay and hoping that your 0.3 lead, according to the engine evaluation, will sustain throughout the match. So I do like the f4 strategy.
Okay. Well, we've now, let's focus on our analysis then and give it the big board that it deserves, since we're providing some edumacation here for the chat. So talk about that. Oh, wow. So here we see c3, which is probably going to be conducive to the f4 follow-up, right? Obviously, c4 no longer on the table. The question is, answer me this, Robert. Can black immediately strike with e5 here, trying to rid himself of this weak pawn and do so before white has played f4? Is that a candidate move here for black?
I'm going to say, of course, it is a candidate move, but it's not a good one. And the problem is that with the 2 bishops advantage for white, trading the queens in that position, which will definitely occur if you go e5, d takes e5. Well, if you take with the queen, of course, the queens are traded immediately. But if you go bishop takes e5, then knight d2 to f3, and the queens will be removed from the board. And that leaves white well ahead because of the weak light squares left behind by the fact that black does not have a light square bishop. So I think castling instead of playing e5 was the right decision.
Okay. Well, and we've seen exactly that happen on the board. So white returning the favor, getting his king safe. I'm looking for this move f4 to come in, since it's what we've seen happen here. But I'm going to anticipate black plays the move c5 now, not sitting around and waiting for the chance to get pressure. Even in a French as weird as this that the Indians have been playing, where black has already traded off his light square bishop, the idea of c5, knight to c6, bring pressure to the d4 pawn is still about as typical as it gets in this French structure, right?
Yeah, for sure. It's very typical. We're in normal territory, and I don't really expect too many crazy things to happen. But as we see, I guess we have the other games underway as well.
Okay.
These games here. But yeah, I don't know. I think that in both games thus far, black is doing all right for the time being. In the game where Chiron is white, I believe that spatial advantage looks beautiful for the time being. At some point, black will go f6 and kind of chisel away at that menacing pawn center for white. But this move knight d to b8 looks very strange. But I mean, Danny, how would you explain that move?
Well, let me jump over to that board, because you have you sort of changed direction on me there, and I didn't have the right board up. But okay, now we have it. So knight d to b8 was played. Partner. Nope, it's all right. You're keeping me on my toes. That's your job. So knight d to b8. Yeah. So, well, one of the things that's a human idea, I guess we'll just relate to the knowledge that we have, which is f6 is often the idea, right, to try to undermine the lead pawn in the French. But maybe perhaps here black doesn't like the development that he has. But you're right. Seeing a move like knight d to b8 in a French, it's got me speechless. Okay, I don't know. It's a weird move. I guess it makes sense now that the a4 and a5 structures are locked. I mean, the knight is coming to a6 to expose the b4 square, but it definitely feels like black has spent a lot of time for not a lot of action.
Right, and if white cannot make use of that extra time and the extra development, which I don't see a way to do so, then the fact of the matter is that the bishop's now on d7, the knight can go to a6, and black actually completes its development that way. The knight on b6, instead of going to b8, would have been a terrible placement, because what is that knight on b6 doing? The pawn on a4 and b3 locks that knight up, and so it's kind of awkwardly sitting there. And here, on the other hand, when the knight comes to a6, potentially black can even try to play for a b5 break with that bishop on d7 once the knight on c6 moves out of the way. So it's quite an interesting turn of events here.
Yeah, and as we see on the main game, knight a6 has been played. I backed up to that moment you highlighted here, where the knight would have, if it had come to b6, I guess sort of the more human move, because humans don't want to undevelop a piece when it's already in the game. But you're right. I mean, but it's interesting. Goal knows what he's doing as far as avoiding a Russian schoolboy rule, right? You never put your knight in front of a b pawn on the queen side, because it limits your own counterplay. So as funny as it is, right, we get these moves played by Indians, and at first sort of like they grab your eye like, what? And then you take a deeper look and you're like, wow, that makes a ton of positional sense. And it's the kind of unbiased approach that the Indians have, without emotion, without an undevelopment idea. And in the game, I think you're right. Now that the knight has gotten itself to b4 and it's hitting the light square bishop, look for black to continue to try to get counterplay here on the queen side. So me likey and me learning. But you know what me also want? Misa wants, Jar Jar Binks is here. Misa wants to open up analysis of the other games that are underway. We have Ann Sachs taking on Boot, and we have Boot taking on Ann Sachs. So that's the match that started immediately after this one. But Houdini and Fire, really, I think if we were talking about the day 3 schedule, Houdini and Fire is the first matchup that really is lighting a fire in our pants, if you will, right?
You caught me off guard with that joke, and I love it. And I should have laughed more, but I was trying to keep it together. But Houdini in second place, a point behind Stockfish, and Fire is in fourth place. Has been impressive thus far with 7 out of a possible 12 points. And Fire, remember, took half a point off of Stockfish. Yep. So Houdini really wants to go 2-0 here. And that will make a big change, because, again, Stockfish only got 1.5. And so that 2-point full 2 points would be a huge difference maker.
Yeah, as everyone can see here from the standings, currently the live standings reflect exactly what the standings were after day 2. But we will refer back to this image as that changes. Heading into the day, you can see it was Stockfish there with 10.5 and a purple beautiful icon, followed by Houdini and Komodo. And as the live standings are updated, we will keep you updated with that, of course. So, all right, as we pop back over here, there's as this has become for us, Robert, every day at about this time, it becomes so much action going on. We just simply have to choose a place to go to. If you're not happy with the game we're analyzing and trying to provide some education on, log into chess.com/live. Click the button there beneath the Chess TV player if you can, assuming that's there. I haven't checked on it. And follow these games if you can. And decide what you want to look at. But Robert, where would you like to take this beautiful part of the program?
Well, let's see. We already took a peek at the Chiron Goal matchup. So let's go to the Boot Ansax matchup where Boot is white. Because the game where Ansax is white, we've seen this position on 2 boards now. Ansax Boot is the same as Fire Houdini, where Fire is white. They both played the same opening. So I would like to start with Boot white, Ansax black.
We've got a QGD Tarktower, right? This is something you just don't see at high levels anymore as far as theoretical relevancy, right? This move order itself is not something that's very popular.
Yeah, it definitely isn't very popular. And this Queen A4 check seemed a little weird. You know, it's just a simple check. You're like, well, why can't black just block it? And here the move Queen D7 was played. I was going to say that there's not really that comfortable way to defend that check. If you put your knight on D7, well, then the white knight hops into E5, threatens to go into C6, which would be very difficult to contend with. Here on Queen D7, now white has a few options. Yes, of course, you can trade queens if you so choose. You can play bishop to B5, and that sometimes forces black to play C6, in which case that bishop on B7 looks a little weird. And wow,
whoa!
That is a great move. And the point is
great
A4
move
does not work because bishop B5 check picks up the queen in a way that benefits white. If you just put that on the board, queen takes A4, bishop B5 check. The point is that black plays queen takes B5, then knight takes C7 check occurs, and then white recaptures on B5 and goes up a pawn.
Yeah, sorry to be over dramatic with the whoa, but as you were giving some awesome instruction, which I agree with every point, that move was played on the board, and I gave a what right instant replay. So what? Okay, but now that he's going to just take back, why was this trade advantageous? I think we're still probably going to see bishop b5 to gain that tempo and force c6, that kind of instructive idea you talked about. What do you think?
Yeah, and especially with his bishop on d5, it's actually misplaced. It seems like it's in a good spot, but now queen c2 is played, and, well, there's multiple purposes. One, now it supports pawn to e4. Also, if you castle for black, well, then bishop d3 is a tempo-gaining move because the pawn on h7 is going to be a target. So,
but what about? I mean, I agree totally, and queen c2 is instructive. But I was thinking white would go for the line you suggested with bishop b5, c6, bishop back to e2, and then let's say if castles happens, you might see the move queen c2 trying to expose that bishop that is now kind of trapped outside of its own pawn structure. So what do you think? Maybe the issue with bishop b5 was black was going to play bishop c6 and force a trade. Yes. Is that okay? That's the issue. Got it.
And I wouldn't consider it an issue as much as that white must value that having the bishop pairs on the board favors white in a way that is means that, you know, even if it's awkward to play a move like bishop to c6, it's not worth the trade. And the reason why it's good to keep the bishop on the board, if knight takes c6 here, for example, bishop d3 is a possibility, threatening e3 to e4, trapping the bishop.
And even knight d2 might be a possibility, also threatening e4, trapping the bishop.
Knight d2 looks like a very interesting move as well. You're right. And the essential point is that if black ever loses this light square bishop, the queen side light squares are going to become weak, and they will never be able to be defended. So knight takes c6, even bishop d2 might be a good response. Just trying to make sure the knight doesn't come to a5, where it's going to be annoying and a nuisance on the light squares there, and then play rook c1, knight to e5. That knight moves from c6. So white is looking good here.
Okay, agreed on all points, and I'm glad that you brought us to this game because I feel like I just learned something. But Robert, what's going on in the game where Ansax is the first player, and it looks like we're having another isolated queen pawn? That would be an interesting one that I know Norm, our buddy who's been helping out with some of the stuff behind the scenes, I'm sure he's listening now. I'd be curious to know how many IQPs we've gotten, right? Because the IQP structure can occur from so many different types of openings, both a French, the Caro, right, the Queen's Gambit. So how many IQPs have we had? That's been an interesting factor as well.
Yeah, we've had really, it feels like every single game is
Yeah.
featuring an IQP, or every other game, really. And I just want to give a shout out in the Twitch chat to Mountain_Dupiter for saying, "Damn, Robert is sexy." So I gotta, give my fans a shout out.
Robert
right there.
is. I mean, I feel like people don't know how sexy you are, but you are a future commodity coming to Twitch. Okay, anytime someone wants to go to Twitch TV/GMRLH2 and make an early follow, we promise to have Robert streaming regularly very soon. So, all right. Well, let's talk quickly about this Ansax boot, what we expect to see in this IQP, and then let's jump to the Houdini games because really, as everyone can see from the standings there, Houdini versus Fire, the 2 versus the 4 seed heading into day 3 is kind of where we maybe should focus here early on.
Yeah, for sure. But let's start with the IQP game, as you said. The point is that Black is going to have difficulty defending that pawn. At some point, White would like to go pawn to F3. We saw that in a game yesterday where the bishop ended up on F2 behind a pawn on F3, and it really challenged Black to figure out what to do with the knights. And F3 was played immediately. And now this bishop can go to G5, and if it wants to, retreat via H4 to F2. And that's a very nice square for it. Now Black
we assume that queen to B6 check here would be met by queen to D4?
Yes, for sure.
I mean, offering the queen trade.
Trading queens, generally speaking, it will not help Black in this position because that pawn is still weak. And again, then the bishop will become permanently unchallengeable for Black. Now, the knight on D6 is actually a good piece. So a key thing to remember is when you have an isolated pawn, the knight actually behind the pawn is often a good piece because it can jump to the squares protected by that pawn. So now the knight can go to C4 at some moment. Unfortunately, for the time being, there's a nasty pin on this knight on F6, and I think Black is going to have to figure out, I know Black is going to have to figure out what to do with this rook, because rook D7 is, it can stay there for the moment, but I don't know. The pieces don't look like they're really in tandem. And
I agree. White can't necessarily just take on F6 there and then take D5 because of B2 maybe, but even a simple move like C3 and that rook on D7 feels weird. But look at that. Right on the note that you said, I feel like the Indians are taking advice from you, the Grandmaster, today. Black isn't defending passively after bishop G5. He plays what the humans would say you should always do, right? Which is be as aggressive as possible when you have the IQP. The best defense is a good offense when you have a positional weakness. You want to have threats all over the board so that your opponent can't just focus in on that target. So knight C4 was played, but then queen D4 comes out, and somehow I feel like Ansax is on the road to getting the better version of this isolated queen pawn, even with this last active knight move, though.
And I think it's very much worth discussing that White could have won bishop takes F6 there and shattered the pawn structure. And the reason that was not played was despite the fact that Black's kingside pawn structure would have been compromised if instead of queen D4, he'd taken on F6. The key thing is that now the pawn is on F3. The E3 square is very vulnerable. The knight on C4 can come to E3, attacks the pawn on B2. And then after G takes F6, if queen D4, then queen B6 trades the queens. And I feel like Black is not doing so poorly in that situation.
Agreed, and fantastic point, especially because I think a lot of our viewers would think, wait, you can shatter the structure, don't think twice about it, but White is trying to have a different type of edge here, though it is sort of minimal, about plus 0.35. So we'll keep our eye on this one, as well as the ones we started with, if you're just joining us, that being Goal and Chiron. But it's time to take a look at the action of the day, where I feel like we may be focusing a lot of our efforts, at least in this first initial round, and that is Houdini and Fire, the number 2 seed versus the number 4 seed. Let's dive into some deep analysis here, Robert, because me likey the dynamics of this position for teaching right here with this weird queenside tension, the A4, the B5 pawn in this game where Houdini is White.
Yeah, this is a very complicated position, and I feel like this is actually the type of position that engines are not very good at evaluating. And of course, they're better than I am at evaluating it, but there's so much tension there, and it exists forever. And for example, at some point, the engines may say, oh, Black should go B takes A4, without realizing that 15 moves down the road, the pawn A6 will actually be lost, and the pawn on C4 becomes a target. That said, both sides are going to have trouble deciding when to release the tension, because at any moment White as well can go A takes B5. So for the time being, White often likes to try to play on the king side, but there's not really anything going on there. So if we move like knight B to D2, and then eventually playing maybe knight H2 or something like that, I mean, it's kind of unclear how White actually pushes forward on that side of the board. So,
yeah.
It's a very typical struggle right now. I think knight d2 makes sense. Knight d2 followed by queen e2 and try to go rook e to a1, something like that. But yeah, I would say that black's doing perfectly well here.
Yeah, black is holding his own against Houdini, and it was another Spanish. We could tell that just from the pawn structure, but also you can see the ECO there right above the main board, everybody, if you're ever wondering what the openings are. I really like the highlight that you made about how if white would had time for knight d2, knight f1, maybe even a knight h2, maybe even a g4 and a knight to g3, right? Getting the knight behind a pawn storm like that is a typical way, a la Bobby Fischer attacking on the king side. But what you highlighted so well is that, okay, if we could just drop white's pieces and put them over here on the king side, you might have a totally different opinion on this position. But given that the structure says black has everybody where it needs to be on the queen side and white is miles away from that, you just have to feel like black has gotten, you know, the better of the opening so far, right?
Yeah, I think black has really gotten the equality of the opening more than anything. It's just that black's idea is simple: go rook a6, rook a8, especially now the pawns have been traded off on b5. And you know, you can also consider going for push with b4. So everything has to be timed correctly. You don't want to ever go b4 and allow the white to double in the a file and just give a permanent pin. That would be very painful.
This feels like a game. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I would say rook a6 was indeed played because the rook is protected on a6.
Yep.
So now the rook can swing over to a8. There won't be a vicious pin.
Right. And this feels like a game, as not to say that there haven't been others in this event, but this feels like a game that could even potentially have some theoretical relevance for top grandmasters, right? This is a Lopez kind of position we've seen before. Not maybe some of the earlier moves that happened around 8 and 9 were a little not as popular, but this type of structure, you know, the struggle, white wanting to play b4 but having to always consider the en passant, like what are the repercussions of weakening the c3 pawn, and everything that happens in a Spanish structure like this. This feels to me like a game I could see two top grandmasters playing. What do you think?
Absolutely, but I'm going to have to switch the game over to Komodo versus Fizbo because that game is all sorts of wild. Danny, you're not going to believe the position when you put it on the board right now.
Oh, my God, the king's on c6. Take me to there. Take me to there.
I don't even know. It was a Botvinnik variation. That much is clear.
Okay,
but
Fizbo needs to put himself in check with the Botvinnik at this point. I mean, didn't he lose a terrible game yesterday when we were commenting?
I mean, Fizbo is awesome. Okay, let's just start with that.
Hey, I know that your goal at this point is to keep the anti-Fizbo talk, you know, off the air. But you know, let me remind you of how this all started. Right there. Look at those eyes. Look at those eyes.
Started with me being quite harsh about Fizbo's play, but what in the world is going on here?
I have no idea. This is totally nuts.
The king is on c6. that photo is amazing of Fizbo. But the king is on c6, which is not at all where you ever want your king.
It's less than ideal. I think that's the scientific term. Less than ideal, yeah.
I would have to agree with that. And very importantly, the king has no moves. So if one check were to occur...
Pawn mates. Pawn mates. Drop a pawn on b5. Pawn mates.
So queen c2 was just played... And the question is, what in the world is black going to do? Because if black can somehow consolidate, that pawn mass in the center is really a sight to behold.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, with that bishop on g2, just staring down that pin on the d5 pawn, I don't see how there's going to progress ever is going to be made. However, bishop h6, okay, the knight at some point is going to have to leave e4 because it's not really doing that much from the e4 square. So, I mean, if you... But I'm not really seeing the progress. That's really my issue here. I feel like white, is better. And if we do a quick material count, it's somehow even.
Yeah.
That's weird in and of itself.
This is a position that would give Aaron Nimzovich, a heart attack, right? I mean, this is not his typical type of balanced structure where both sides have a 4-on-1 on the other side of the board.
Are you trying to say that this is not his system, Danny?
Oh my God. The first awkward pun of the day. Golf clap from Robert Hess. Not Nimzovich's system, but okay. Knight to g5 is played. I was going to suggest either bishop g5 or knight g5, but I think you made a great point that knight can't just sit there on pre forever despite the pin. So the question now, Robert, is what is black doing again? It's funny. The only way to really maybe undermine this massive structure here would be to further allow it to be potentially strong. Moves like b3 or I don't know. How do you open the c file and get at this king here, right?
Yeah, and b3 is always an interesting and tempting move because the point is if you go c3, then maybe the queen can come to d3 and slither into the b5 square. And so that would be very dangerous for black, of course. It looks like black's just trading off all the rooks, but I don't like that for black because in an ending, look at that h-pawn. yes, black has a very impressive central mass, but the H pawn will roam free in a much quicker fashion than any of the central pawns, especially with the king properly located on c1. And
it's almost similar to like a French poison pawn, right? Where like white has the passed H pawn, but black has the much better queenside advantage. Although, I guess there's no real appropriate comparison other than a Botvinnik Slav. That's probably the most appropriate. Yeah. So, given that it was a Botvinnik,
is a great move, Danny, because if rook takes e3,
pawn takes.
Pawn,
and
you're
E4.
helping to stop the central pawns, and e4 is also a threat, as you just mentioned.
I'm surprised Fizbo just took so quickly there.
Perhaps it was somehow an only move because queen e2 was coming, or queen h7, right? Like white is the one starting to gain momentum. But I was going to say, it's an important lesson on not releasing the tension too soon. When rooks are facing each other in open file, you have to determine whether it benefits you to capture that rook or to allow your opponent to capture you. So that was a really good learning moment for all you watching, that it was better for white to improve the pawn structure, not because it undoubles the pawns. Like the double F pawns are unimportant. It's about taking the pawn towards the center that will allow you eventual break with e4, as just has been played, and by challenging that big black mass of pawns in the center. So a very good way to challenge
the big black mass there. Sounds like we're about to talk about, I don't know, astronomy and black holes or something. I have no idea where we're going with that, but all right.
You almost took that down a black hole. So
I know I almost took that down a road that's not recommended to travel. But all right, here comes e4. I love it. This has been one of the most exciting games. So Fizbo, we'll give Fizbo credit where credit's due. He may be a clown, but he does create some of the most exciting moments we've had in this event so far. What about the game where Fizbo's white?
Where Fizbo is white, somehow the move queen a7 was just played, and everything is hanging. The rook on e1, the bishop on d7, the pawn on h4. Black's king is safer, which is the first thing that I would notice. What I always do when I see a position for the first time is I just try to evaluate all the pluses and minuses. What I like for white is that white is up a pawn, has a pawn that if black is not quick to stop it, can become a queen. That said, white's king is very much exposed, especially without a dark sword bishop. So I like black's chances. I think firstly, I would consider just taking on h4 right away. Mm-hmm. And if you don't capture on h4, there's plenty of other moves that are possible, like a rook to d8 or using that bishop in the dark square.
Look at you predicting Komodo's moves. I'll tell you what, Robert. I know that computer-on-computer action isn't your favorite kind of action, all right? But I'll tell you this. I think you've gotten better from hosting this show. I feel like watching Engines play makes us play more like Engines.
I don't ever want to play like an engine because I love the heart that I put into every match that I ever compete.
Okay, you want to win chess games, and if playing more like Komodo helps you win chess games, you would be okay with that. Don't give me that.
I will be okay with that. I'm also okay giving a shout out to in the chess.com/TV chat to Manmoth, who said, I love Robert Hess, like really love him. So, I'm getting a lot of love today. Appreciate it.
I love it. I also love you, like really love you, like. Let's move on here and talk about the fact that I agree with you, and it looks like Komodo's going to be on his way to taking down Fizbo 2-0. But all the matches are underway, Robert. We also have Deep Shredder and Stockfish, which is speaking of the Poison Pawn French, that's the first thing that pops on the board here in the game where Shredder is white. And then where Stockfish is white, we have a little bit more of a positional affair. So of those two games or any other games, would you like to check in on something?
I think the game where Shredder is white is also an important teaching lesson because it started as a McCutcheon, and normally, right, the variation does not see white capture on f6 and on g7, right? We're taught, opening theory says we don't play like this. We instead retreat our bishop to d2, and then after bishop takes c3, b takes c3. That's the main line. What I am always fascinated about when watching Engines play is that they say, without an opening book, essentially, who cares about the main line? I don't know what the main line is. I'm just playing what I figured to be the best move. Mm-hmm. And so I'm very curious to see if this will pan out for white. I don't really like it because now that black is castled queenside, the pawn center, not to mention the two bishops, seem to be in black's favor. But that being said, it's a little awkward with this rook on g7, trying to figure out how exactly to get this bishop on f8 out. So I do like black here. I think that there's a reason why this opening isn't played very frequently, and I would say that black is slightly better. I have no evaluation in front of me, but something in the range of -0.25 or something.
First of all, I want to say I love when you offer teaching points and you even preface it with that. Can we get a jingle? Somebody watching, let's get a Robert Hess learning moment. Robert Hess teaching points, like a little thing that flashes on the screen. Like, pay attention, Robert Hess is giving you a teaching point. But back to this moment on the, I want to actually talk about that again because you made a great point. In this McCutcheon, like you said, the mainline theory after h6 is bishop to d2, and it's precisely because White recognizes that the all-in strategy of capturing everything here on the king side isn't going to justify itself in the long run because Black's king will get out, as we're seeing in the main game there on the left. Black has castled long. And then what's going to happen is the loss of the bishop pair that happened when you took on f6 is going to ultimately tell the day when the dark squares become a real problem, right? Over all the dark squares, the d4 pawn. So with these ECO books turned off, Robert, I just think it's a really instructive thing to talk about. Yes, it's super interesting. They don't care about the theory, but it almost reinforces some of the theory and the knowledge that we have as human strong chess players about the positional aspects, the long-term abstract features of a position. That's the way we think about when we evaluate stuff at a high level. And so I think that's interesting, right? That Shredder goes for this line where he takes f6, but in the end, I think we're going to see a proving point by Stockfish that it really wasn't the best decision, right?
Yeah, it really does not look like a good decision. And I got distracted for a second there because it looks like Chiron won a game and is about to win the other game as well. So Chiron beats Goal in the battle of the unimportant engines. That's what I'm calling that.
The battle of the unimportant engines. LOL, hashtag. Let me bring that up because we got to see. I mean, okay, as much as Robert has made Chiron his new Fizbo, Chiron does deserve a little bit of love here. What happened here? He just crushed Goal like a...
Well, the game was actually really fascinating because it looked like the position was locked up around move 35, 38.
Okay, I'll go there.
And then all of a sudden, Black tried to push forward on the queen side, perhaps realizing that if Black does nothing, you're going to be much worse. That's generally speaking why I feel like the engine didn't just go like bishop f7 back and forth and do nothing.
Right.
Instead, it went b5, and White's knight hopped into f4, and then bishop h3 came, and e6 became a target, and it was all downhill from there. So,
I think you're right. I think this move b5 was played. Again, it's hard for us to ever say an engine missed an idea, but you can see that here, Goal evaluates probably that some kind of action needed to happen over here, and Chiron shakes his finger like Dikembe Mutombo and says, not in my house, it doesn't need to happen. I'm going to go for something you didn't see coming. And all of a sudden, now when I take back, bishop h3 comes in, and Chiron goes on to win. A nice little positional affair here. a5 falls, followed by some of the pawns on the king side. And nice.
Way nicer than the positional affair was your reference to Dikembe Mutombo. Huge props to you on that one.
Yep, thank you. Let's move on to Goal versus Chiron. I love how you and I are just like so quickly. Yep. Dikembe Mutombo, sports reference, #1 of the day, moving on. Okay, in the game where Goal is white, he hasn't done much better. So something about the dynamics of these engines, right, everybody? As we see the standings heading into today, we know that Chiron and Goal were battling out, as we said, for the unimportant engine battle. But Chiron just wins, so in the live standings, he has leapfrogged Goal. And now he's going to win again and leave Goal in the dust.
Yeah, and it was an interesting moment just now where on move 103 by Black, king e3, why did White not go rook b3 check? I feel like is a decent question.
You know what? I bet it leads to some like crazy awesome mate, dude. King f2, rook g3, knight g3, h6.
No, king f2, I'll just go rook b2 check. I'm going to keep following your king. Oh, perhaps you go king e1 to d2 or something like that and just like escape out.
Yeah. I go if rook b2, king e1, rook b1, king e2, rook check. No, if I eventually...
You go through d2 like back to c1 or something.
Okay, yeah. Okay.
But it was the only moment, I guess, that had any sort of relevance because now it's just over down a knight and pawn getting checkmated by force. So,
well, that means we'll leave this match behind us, right? Chiron is taking down Goal. It's going to be a 2-0 score. In fact, it now officially is as checkmate is on the board. All right, so the next one that we moved on to, again, for those of you who just joined us, shame on you for missing all the excitement of today. But Ansax and Boot got underway second. Looks like their first one is an endgame that only Ansax can win. As we have a bishop versus a knight, but what are your thoughts that we can provide some instruction for the fans here?
Well, I'm not sure if only Ansax can win this because Black can make use of the fact that the knight hops from color to color and can maybe tickle that pawn a2. That being said, I don't really see a way to do that. The only square to actually attack that pawn is on c3, and if white's giving up the c3 pawn, well, that's a problem. And the only other square is c1. So it's important to note that when white, or well, whoever has a pawn on the rook files, knights are actually very bad at attacking it because there are only 4 possible squares. In this case, b4. In this case, 3, right? b4, c3, and c1. But it doesn't pause an a3. There's b5, c4, c2, and b1. So the knight does not have many options to get that pawn under attack, and a bishop often cuts off the knight before it can even become an attacking piece. So this game is a draw. I saw another interesting game, Danny. Sorry to hop around so quickly.
Nope, that's your job. Let's do it.
Was the game where Komodo is white against Fizbo. There's 2 queens on the board for white, but it looks like black is about to queen, and I have no idea what's going on.
You and every other human being on the planet, if you're not an Indian, you can't understand this. But
both sides have 2 queens. That is what's happening in this game. And importantly,
Stockfish doesn't know what's going on either. You can see the evaluation bar sliding all over the place.
Well, I'd have to imagine that with white about to queen some more pawns, that white has to be better. But knights are great defensive pieces. It's hard to checkmate with that knight on b6. That said, I would not be surprised if one of these other pawns, d6 or f6, becomes a queen, though white's king is the one who's in more trouble than black's. Right after king a6. Right after king a6, the white king is about to come under great fire, and I guess king to e3 at some point. The king, immediately the king sneaks out, and a big problem for black is that their knight takes c4 with check, that the knight is pinned and it can't further help in the attack. So after a move like knight c4, the king can run to f2. And somehow, some way, that white king is finding shelter. But there are 2 queens on the last.
Dude, I know that's what I was about to say. And sorry, I almost cut you off. Is exactly that. It's like, what human being has an advantage in an endgame, and played a move like e4 that we evaluated before we left this game, completely destroys black's center. We saw what Komodo did to Fizbo here, but then evaluates that the best way to win is to allow the type of game we have now on the live position there to the left, which, like you said, it's too, like, no human beings don't play chess this way. But I love it. This is friggin' fascinating. And when this king finds shelter, because I'm just going to assume that Komodo does. Although, by the way, look at that evaluation, dude. It's shifting. It's actually going the other way toward Fizbo. And somehow maybe Komodo did misevaluate, because now with the king on f3, despite the material advantage, it's getting harder and harder for white to prove the win.
Yeah, and the material advantage is what? 1 pawn, a single pawn. Now, that pawn is very important. It's pawn d6, which at some moment can be used to try to either as a decoy to distract the knight on b6 or actually become a queen. Now, I don't really see how the white king is ever going to get out of checks. So, queen d1 check, even if the king goes to g3 and there are no immediate checks, how is white going to ever make progress? That knight on b6 is so strong. And now queen h7 was played instead, I guess pointing out that the pawn at c5 is somehow not available for capture. Maybe queen d3 comes in with check. And that's the essential thing for white, is that you can't allow your king to be harassed. And, I'm guessing it's going to be one of those situations where it's just a draw. Somehow there's an infinite amount of checks and nobody's going to win. But, again, the time control, 15-minute with 2-second increment. We're already well into the round, which means that they're playing with not too much time on the clock.
Yep. And if we're talking about the standings or this game's implications, don't underestimate it, fans, because Stockfish beat Fizbo 2-0. And it was in games that initially got Robert Hess so heated against the clown. And now, I mean, so if Komodo is unable to return and deliver the same results, that might be, again, another sign as to why Stockfish is able to separate himself and lead the event. We're not going to spend too much time on it. Ansax and Boot have now both drawn both those games, so we're not even worried about it. But where did you want to take us?
I would say Komodo just won with black. Delivered checkmate on Fizbo. There's a sold knight on a1, which is just painful to look at, and checkmate did occur on that game. So Komodo, if somehow Komodo could pull off this wacky 4-queen position, then that will be a 2-0 result. And let's see where else is worth taking. Let's look at Stockfish white against Shredder, because Stockfish has these menacing pawns on e5 and f5, which would give any human player a huge headache, and just you'd be really scared, right? Because at some moment, f6 is going to be a huge threat. And not only f6, e6 can be annoying. The knight can hop to f4 into g6, where the king is unsafe. This pawn h3 doesn't do anything for black, so it's not an attacking piece. And for to my eyes, it looks like white is just almost completely won.
Well, to Stockfish's eyes as well, white is almost completely won. So that means if Stockfish is just able to roll these pawns, as you said, partner, and just crush Shredder here, then what is Shredder doing in that French that we spent some time educating the fans on in regards to why Shredder sort of proved the theory as it needs to be by going for kind of a dubious line in the McCutcheon as white, and it looks like what we said is coming true. One of the things we highlighted about this line, if you're focused on the analysis board, folks, is that going for this capture on f6 is not recommended in top grandmaster play precisely because of the loss of the dark square bishop, and we said that would be an issue, and now you can see in the main position, black has won the d4 pawn, has a great dark square bishop, and I think that's why black has an edge here.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And again, this was a weird opening choice, one that it does not have the Hess seal of approval. Giving up the dark square bishop like that is just not recommended. And so I think that Stockfish looks ready to go up 2-0, and f6 has finally been played in that other game of Stockfish's. But again, I think we have to go back to the four queens. I mean, I can't get over this game where it looks like black is the one now trying to push this a pawn. The white king is just on g2 and still feels very unsafe. I wouldn't be surprised if at some point black attempts to trade a pair of queens and then uses a pawn and try to promote. But then again, a bishop on e5 will be a good defensive piece. So I'm very confused, trying to figure it out on the fly. I think now the material is even because the c4 pawn fell. I'm not sure if that's a good pawn to take because now there can be some checks in the diagonal if the queen moves from c4. So.
Yeah, this is, but still, just such a weird, fascinating game to happen here. Now, white voluntarily plays king to g1 in a position with
a3.
An a3. I mean, Fizbo is, I hate to say it, but the clown is outplaying the dragon in a position where it seemed like he had no business doing so. But this is just, I would doubt Komodo can lose this position as white, but I'm getting closer and closer to believing that white has lost all chances of winning.
Yeah, now it's looking closer to be a draw. Queen a8 check, take on a3. I don't see how white is going to lose a position like that. Okay, queen c6 check.
He's going to play bishop takes c5, but still, there's no way black isn't going to check until the cows come home here against the white king.
Right, there has to be a perpetual at this point.
By the way, do the cows come home in New York, or is that just something us West Coast boys understand?
Yeah, we just take your milk. We don't have cows up in New York. So.
Okay, makes sense. Got it.
Well, my roommate's lactose intolerant, so we don't really have milk in our house.
Most people on the East Coast are lactose intolerant and suffering from celiacs, but we won't get into that.
That got really deep really fast. So let's go back to the chess games, where Stockfish is now up 2 exchanges, or about to be up 2 exchanges, it looks like.
Komodo's going to win this pawn, everybody, but the reason this is a draw, just real quick before we do, is because this knight will stop this pawn dead in its tracks on a light square, and the black king will get there sooner. So Fizbo is holding a draw. We're officially going to call it back to the Stockfish game, as Robert said. Yeah,
so Stockfish with white pieces is just dominating. Look at this. The white king has no pawns in front of it, but it's completely safe. The black king is not safe. There's a pawn on d7. White could have captured the rook before and chose not to. And of course, queen takes h6 has just been played. The g7 pawn is pinned. That's another free pawn. Black is completely toast here. So that leaves just the one game remaining where Shredder is white against Stockfish. And again, look at this bishop on e5. It completely dominates and corrals the knight on e2. The knight on e2 has to sit there protecting the pawn on g3. And black is not going to take that pawn, right? There's no need to take it. It's not like white has any sort of active plan. So instead of capturing this pawn on g3, black will leave this bishop on e5, try to make progress, perhaps on the other side of the board with an eventual a5, I would consider, just to forever stop b4 from being an idea.
Maybe eventually double rooks on the b file if it suits your fancy.
And rook g4, maybe double on the g file. You have options here, and so there's no need to rush. And I think a lot of humans would say, okay, I'm just going to take on g3 and then get an advantage that way. But again, the f6 pawn was also hanging there, so maybe not.
Yeah. Right now, black's playing tickle, and whether you double on the b or the g file will depend on black preferring the B or the G spot, but we'll leave that alone. Let's move back to the Komodo game with Fizbo and the 4 queens.
Did you really just say that? I'm not gonna I'm gonna have to call attention to that,
right? No, you don't call attention to things I say. You move on.
Okay.
What we've got here is analysis worthy of somehow, some way, white did get the... What happened here? How can Fizbo with... I mean, seriously, with table bases on, which again, everybody, if you remember the format, no openings, yes, but see there on the bullet point, the table bases are on. So,
Still, right?
like, how can Fizbo be losing in this endgame?
Fizbo is not losing. I believe
Okay.
it's still a draw. Because, okay, firstly, what is that king doing on the queen side?
Yeah,
Is
that's why I'm wondering. Like, they obviously know it's a draw because of their table base, but like how do you ever play moves away from the pawn with the king?
Yeah, that makes absolutely no sense. But I guess it sees this knight g3. Yeah, exactly. Knight g3 played. So g7 can't be played. If the king goes to g5, the king comes to e6 and is just in time to stop the pawn. So this is absolutely ridiculous. Do not learn from the engines in this game because they're teaching you how to almost lose. And just because they have a table base that says this is, they know it's a draw. They can make any move. Here's 8 different moves that draw. Let's play the weirdest one.
Yeah,
So
no, that's literally the best way to describe it right there. That is a clippable comment there from Mr. Robert Hess. Let's play the weirdest way to draw as an engine. So, yeah, all right, well, okay. And it does show you there, you see the evaluation above the main board there with Stockfish. That's never going to change. It's going to evaluate it. Yep, white's winning, but this is a draw. It's a table-based draw. Okay, where are we going to? Houdini drew both games with fire, FYI. We didn't get a lot of time on that match. I think partly because it's Komodo's fault that he had a 4-queen game versus Fizbo, but just showing you that both of these games ended in stalemates with the kings on the board. So as far as the live standings go, Robert, Houdini sort of missed the chance to maybe gain a little bit by not beating Fire, but Fire's been really strong, so that's not a huge surprise.
right, and Fire's been in 4th place and has been impressive, and now it's up to Stockfish to win this last one with the black pieces. And if Stockfish can win this one, it's a 2-0 score for the round, and pushing the distance between Stockfish and Komodo and Houdini is increasing it. So right now, well, actually, I guess Komodo's only going to win 1.5. So Stockfish would love to win this game, and honestly, it might just seal up the event.
Well, I think it's hard to say that just because Stockfish will be playing Komodo and Houdini directly, right? So if there's ever a chance to make a comeback, it's because you've got a one-on-one opportunity, right? You're in control of your own destiny, to use an overblown sports term. Overused sports term, but I agree. I think the chances are Stockfish is certainly not going to lose 2-0, probably at least splits, given what we've seen and what we know about Stockfish. So yeah, it's coming down to it. By the way, eventually that game between Komodo and Fizbo with the pawn and despite the evaluation being better for white, it was a table-based draw. They did draw. So Komodo unable to get 2 points from Fizbo, but does win the match with 1.5 apiece. That 4 queens game is going down in legend. So we have this last game, as you said. We have this game here with black, Stockfish being black.
Yeah, and this game is too standard for me. I mean, that 4 queens game made me feel very uncomfortable. And now I feel like this is just a normal human-like position where black is trying to press, but at some moment if black does something wrong, the king on b6 is not exactly optimally placed. So, b4 at some moment might be really scary. So I would, it's an engine. It probably will not be overlooking that, but it is something that, if you're moving on a 2-second increment, remember the time control, 15 minutes, 2-second increment. The round started a long time ago, so they're really just playing the increment at this point. Something can go wrong, and then b4 happens, and then black is just lost. And that's not actually completely out of the question. So,
yeah, I mean, especially because, as you said, the king on b6 is in a rather precarious spot should black get a little bit overly aggressive. But okay, so where does black develop a plan that has less risk for the king on b6 becoming in danger?
Well, okay, I just took on g3. I was wondering when that would happen. And now, well, b4 has indeed happened. So now actually, I'm not sure who's better. It's one of those situations where, yes, black is up a pawn. And if, white allows black to keep this bishop, we'll have the bishop pair. But for the moment, white's chances are really increasing. And I don't know. Okay. I would say b5.
What happened there?
b5
Somehow,
was...
Yeah. We're cutting each other off Charlie Brown style. Let me finish the sentence and say what happened there. Go ahead.
Well, I say we're both confused because white went b4 and then instead of captured on c5 went b5. But it's fascinating that if white had indeed captured on c5, the black king would have been very safe there.
This is such a take a snapshot of this, everybody, because this is again computer chess 101. The king on c5. There is no dark square bishop for white, so there's no access to things like this, right? Not Bughouse. And opening up yet another file would probably actually backfire, and white's king would be the one in more danger. So, again, a moment like that, a very computerish chess, not human chess, but still fascinating nonetheless. And look at Stockfish's evaluation bar, constantly biased toward his own position, right? Hashtag open source Stockfish. But anyway, we know that Stockfish loves his own chess moves. But it looks like he's right to do so, because now that f-pawn is going to be the final story here. It's going to win the game for black.
Yeah, and somehow even without the f-pawn is needed to protect the bishop on e5. But what I was going to say is even without the f-pawn, I would say black would have great winning chances because the two bishops are so strong.
Yep.
Black's king is in great shape, and white's king is the one in a little bit of a precarious situation. So this has to be completely winning. Especially now.
I think it will be, which again will mean as we move over and give you another shot of the live standings here, everybody, Stockfish is going to move to 12.5 points after this game. So I disagreed with you, partner, when you said you thought it would basically be over. But with a 2-point lead, Houdini and Komodo better make some noise, right? They better make some noise in the form of beating Stockfish, which nobody has done yet, right? Has Stockfish lost a single game?
No.
No, he's given up draws, obviously, but he hasn't lost a single game.
Stockfish has not lost a game. Houdini has not lost a game, and Komodo has not lost a game either.
Got it. Okay, there you go.
And Ansax is drawing everybody, but has lost 2 games.
Okay. Well, Anskax, as we learned yesterday, you can have a C after an S. By the way, I took so much heat for that, forgetting my own name spelling. Oh, let's focus in the moment. All right, look how quickly I like that moment as an instructive point, because I would be biased toward the bishop pair, but he immediately recognizes giving it up followed by rook a3 forces an even more awkward defensive setup for Shredder, with the rook dominating the third rank, and now the move bishop f7 is basically forcing the loss of the c4 pawn, everybody, because of tactics like, let me just show you, bishop takes c4 and rook c3 check coming. So I just love how quickly they do things that I as a human would be so afraid or think twice about doing, but that's because their calculation is at another level.
Yeah, and there's a really nice tactic because of giving up the f pawn for the c pawn is a way more important pawn. There's bishop takes c4 ideas if the king was still on c2 and the rook was protecting the bishop, things like that. And now white is offering a rook trade, but it's kind of too little too late at this point. The pawns on d4 and f4 are both passed, and so perhaps in a human game there could be some hope. But yeah, with what black is doing right now, it's definitely hopeless.
Yeah, amazing technique. And again, it's technique different than the way humans apply technique in these endgames, because it's not based on, what have we learned from Uncle Yermo, right? It's like you want to set a goal position and you want to know where your pieces are best placed, and it's about the strangle, right? Sort of taking away options from your opponent. This is just pure brute force Stockfish calculation that no man, human, woman, child, or computer on the planet can really match Stockfish's tactical prowess. So look at that. He just destroyed white's blockade. Like that, honestly, I feel abused in watching that. That was abusive. Seriously.
Can you talk about it, Danny? You feeling okay?
I'm already going to therapy. You know that. Now I got some new material, so it's not a bad thing.
Yeah, unfortunately for Shredder, might have to join you in the next session because it's a brutal one.
Yeah, if I bring a robot wife, my therapist might look at me a little awkward, so I won't do that.
I feel like your human wife would also look at you a bit awkward.
Yeah, that's true. All right. Well, with this win, is it over yet? Nope. Shredder is still fighting the good fight. But with this win, Stockfish, as you see in the standings, everybody right above the analysis board, is going to move on. And be 12.5 up. Let's remind everybody what's coming up next. Right after this match finishes, Robert Hess and I will have the call for round 8, which is, it's the day that Stockfish and Houdini go at it, currently in first and second place. So that'll be a real telling factor. One of the ways that Komodo perhaps gets a second place finish in this event, Robert, is that Stockfish matches up better with Houdini and beats Houdini, right? Whereas Komodo maybe is able to hold some draws against Stockfish, and that might be what pushes Komodo into the super final. But if you don't know the format, everybody, after day 3, tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Pacific, we are going to have the super final, which means after this preliminary round robin, we have Stockfish, we're assuming, versus either Komodo or Houdini at this point in that super final. So Robert and I will be able to focus on one match and really dive into stuff there. And there we have it. Checkmate is on the board, Robert, and now you can do that thing you do after you get checkmated. Remember that thing you do?
Cry?
Yeah, that's right. And I like disappear into the matrix like Homer into the hedge.
Yeah, I feel like it's a little public for me to cry on air, but at the same time, I'm actually crying because of how impressed I am by Stockfish. That was, like you said, dismantling what looked like a sort of fortress, a nice little blockade, and it just, it existed for about 25 seconds, and then it was gone. So,
well, I'm going to back that thing up like Juvie and every other 90s hip-hop song, which what happened to those, right? I'm going to back that thing up, and I just want to show, again, this moment right here, which was some highlightable stuff, everybody. Stockfish, without hesitation, gives up the bishop pair to force a less-than-ideal setup with the king and the bishop. And the tactics that are occurring with bishop f7, the threat to take c4 and then win with rook to c3, has white in almost a virtual zugzwang. And then Robert highlighted the second really great point, which was f5 basically forces white's hand. You can't take f5 because now I'm going to trade rooks and then have two connected passers. But if you don't, then the f-pawn is going to be the pawn that tells the tale, and that's exactly what Stockfish did. So, like I said, it was abusive. Stockfish ran a train, and let's somebody clip that moment. Let's clip the last educational moment by Stockfish because we can all learn a thing or two from the world's strongest chess engine. So, don't you love clips? I love clips. If you're watching this show on Twitch TV/chess, please consider making some clips and share it for us. Also, consider subscribing to our channel. Also, consider following Robert Hess's channel. Also, I'm going to shut up now. Robert, your turn.
Well, you do a lot of talking, and that's typical for conversations with Danny Wrench. But you have a lot of instructional points, and actually that's a good point about giving up the two bishops. And it really is important for coaches and their students to talk about it, because coaches really say you want the two bishops, especially with open space, and knight is much worse. That
almost sounded like parental sex advice there. It's really important that you talk about it. It's really important that coaches and their students talk about this moment. Don't sweep it under the rug, okay? Your kids are already doing it. Talk about it. They already have good endgame technique. So,
the birds and the bishops, right?
The birds and the bishops. Oh, LOL, my friend.
Well, I was about to make an instructional point.
Go ahead, make the instructional point. I'm sorry, I got lost in the birds and the bishops. Do it.
I don't know if I want to make it anymore. No, but on a serious note, coaches really do. They stress that two bishops are better than having a bishop and knight, especially with an open board. And in that position, it was very clear the bishops were stronger. However, if you can transition into an ending where you give up that bishop for the knight, and then it's just a much more forcing way to win, it's always a good idea to calculate it. If a knight is under attack from the bishop, don't just dismiss it because someone tells you that two bishops are better than a knight and bishop. Right. So really always keep that in mind. Don't just dismiss it because your kids tell you it's not happening, right? Have that conversation, coaches and students. Have that talk. That's all I'm talking about, coaches and students. I'm not talking about anything else. Anyway, let's take a moment to get us off camera here so Robert can barf in his bag as Danny takes the show down less than ideal roads. But okay, remind you that the 10-engine round robin all play all format is coming to an end today. The top two scoring engines after day 3 are going to move on to the super final, where we will have everything you ever wanted in a chess show, which is basically Robert Hess and chess. That's pretty much what most people request in a chess show. Time control is what you've seen over the last couple days. If you're just joining the Chess.com Computer Chess Championship, I'll say it again. I don't want to look at you right now. But this is the format. One of the things that has led to so many decisive results is, again, the lack of an opening book has gotten us more exciting, more, frankly, dubious approaches by some of the engines, which allows them to be outplayed. The time control. But it's not like we're tweaking the algorithm to just get more decisive chess. It's not. It's just that it's an approach. It's a different philosophy, right, Robert, than the TCEC, which is a little more like, all right, put all the resources these developers have put behind the engines and see who's best, right? This is more like, hey, let's get down to just the core code of your engine in a fast time control with no access to opening books and see what you're made of, right? Kind of mono-y-mono style stuff. And that's more what this format is as compared to the TCEC. But as the next round gets ready to start here, Robert, do you have anything else you'd like to say, and have you kind of cleared up your issues with me already? Well, I was just going to ask, are you just, can you toot chess.com anymore there about how amazing you guys are and how, getting the best engines online and allowing them to make mistakes? I mean, I'm about it, honestly. Frankly, you know me, I'm an engine hater.
That's right. So you love that they're making mistakes.
Oh, I do, and I'm still trying to root for Fizbo, but Fizbo is now disappointing me again. So I feel like I have to switch teams here.
Yeah, well, Chiron, the other one you've been bashing on, did win 2-0, so maybe you can switch your new favorite target over to Chiron there. But
no, Chiron beat Goal, and that's not saying much. So
that's true. Goal has some real Goal He's got some real Goal showing up at this event, right?
Right.
Goal,
I think you're recycling the joke that I used yesterday.
Goal might need to go empty his gallbladder after that match. Goal has sorry, I've lost it. All right. Well, we got another French, Lottie friggin' Daw on the board here with these engines. This is the part that has kept Robert not on the edge of his seat. But no, I wasn't trying to tout Chess.com too much, dude. I was just trying to say that, hey, it's a different format, right? And
honestly, I said it because I wanted to, show Chess.com the love. I wasn't trying to I was trying to give you a little bit of beef, but
right.
I eat meat. Come on, let's go. Mm-hmm. Give me a nice steak, and then I'll sit here at Chess.com, this computer chess championship all day.
That's
so,
right. Well,
back to
we have it here, and Chiron, the mispronounced Greek centaur, as I read all the Percy Jackson books. It was Chiron, not Chiron. Apparently, I'm just not very smart. I mean, I don't know that there's any defense to that. That's okay with me. I'm not a doctor. I play one on Chess TV. So where do we want to focus here? I think the E45 game is probably better than the French game.
I'm just going to throw my folks to ChessBay94 for a second because I see a comment in the Twitch. Danny, you never had it. I don't know what it is in this case, but I'm going to have to agree.
It might be my mojo. It might be my jockstrap. It might be my chess understanding. Either way, I've never had it, and so losing it in San Francisco is not a PG story that I'm going to tell right now. All right, we have an Italian game. How many times have we had the Italian? Let me check our opening stats, Ruta Boot New, and see what's going on with that.
Ruta Boot New.
Ruta Boot New. In honor of all Canadian listeners, Ruta Boot New. We've had a Gioco Pianissimo, which is the technical term. We've only had one, so this is our second Gioco Pianissimo. Pianissimo.
I feel like you butchered that pronunciation, but I'm not.
Pianissimo?
I don't know.
Not as bad as I've butchered anthropomorphizing.
Anthropomorphize the sizzle?
Besides the sizzle. Full rizzle. All right, well, this is actually going to be an instructive moment because, like kind of what I talked about in the last game where we actually had a Rui Lopez, and I said that this looked like an opening where two top grandmasters might play, which hasn't been the case in most of the French openings that these engines have chosen with their ECOs turned off. But in this case, everybody, we'll keep an eye on this Ansax Chiron battle because depending on what they play here, there have been games from the TCEC, from some of these computer matchups before that have been relevant for top grandmasters in opening theory. It's not something that happens regularly when we have the ECOs turned off, as we do in our format, but it may be interesting. We'll see what happens here. And funny story about some top grandmasters, Robert, actually like to study that way, right? Can you comment on that? I know that Morozevich was famous for doing that, sort of letting the engine assess positions that have been overly analyzed and then turning the ECO off and seeing maybe a creative approach. Is that something that top grandmasters are still doing from time to time?
I would say they definitely are. And there's actually a huge benefit to it because if you're a top grandmaster, which admittedly I'm not, I'm a grandmaster,
hey,
but I'm not playing
you and me both, buddy.
Yeah, not playing at that level. But the point is that they are often looking at tons and tons of variations, right? And yes, of course they're very talented and can figure out if something is just a curveball is thrown, they can figure out a way to meet it. But sometimes you look at a line, the top line according to the engine has a big plus for white, and the second best move is not as high of a plus, but still leaves white with a slightly better position. It's actually harder to combat that second line, which hasn't been studied as in depth. So seeing these computers play each other, and even if it's the exchange French, for example, I doubt will be played at the high level just because it is such an equal-looking position. And you leave your engine on, you figure out a way to combat it. But some of these other positions, whether it's the Italian game or kind of a anti-Berlin or what have you, they are very beneficial to look at and say, wow, this is an interesting way. I thought this wasn't a way to play this opening, but now that I'm looking at the engine, there are some ideas, some nuances that can be had, and does lead to new insight into different openings.
Yep. So there you go, all computer lovers and haters. That's something that the top players do with engines. Speaking of other doo-doo, Goal has been laying a lot of doo-doo on the board. Sorry, I had to. And we've got Fizbo now in Goal, Robert's favorite clown, against the computer, who's got the chutzpah to stick around despite holding down last place. And
when you said doo-doo, I was going to ask how your baby's doing, but we can talk about Goal instead.
That's right. We've got another Caro-Kann, another 2 nights. This has been one of your favoritos, right? Both in your own tournament scene, and now we've seen this played a few times. We haven't actually had a chance to educate on it because there's always been a different game to go to. But talk a little bit about the imbalances of this position, right? In this 2 nights with the bishop on g4, what happens here in what is honestly kind of a dynamic version of the Caro-Kann. If black ends up losing the bishop pair early, or the bishop gets chased and has to run back to g6 due to an overextended kingside. So what are some of the things we can teach about this position here?
Well, first off, after this move d4, which has been played on a number of occasions, instead of this move e6, as was responded, d takes e4, knight takes e4, bishop takes f3. That is the first thing humans should look at, right? Mm-hmm. If you take with the pawn on f3, your pawn structure is shattered. If you take with the queen on f3, the pawn on d4 now is not protected, right? So that's a quote-unquote free pawn. However, the idea for white is that for the cost of that pawn, I get extremely rapid development when I take with my queen. And after queen takes d4, you can do things like c3, followed by bishop c4. You can play, get your dark square bishop out and just castle, and black is woefully underdeveloped, right? So that is an interesting strategy that has to be thought about when playing this opening.
Okay.
So instead of that, as is more common, and e6 was played, now h3, black can always consider taking the knight in f3, and an important point is that the bishop is not stuck behind the pawns. Instead, it's either traded for the knight or retreats to g6 via h5. So that's why this line of the Caro-Kann, it does allow the bishop out, but at the same time, it allows white some rapid development. The 2 knights are developed, the bishops are flowing freely, and so I always prefer white in these structures. And
it seems like black, even without their ECO on, the players that have played black in this Caro-Kann, which I think has been pretty consistently Fizbo, by the way, they seem to be figuring out the idea that probably bishop h5 is favored over taking the pawn, despite their reputation for being materialistic, right? Talk a little bit. There's been some famous games in lines where black has taken on e4, taken on f3, and taken on d4. A game that comes to mind, of course, from the Talbot-Vinnick match, right? The World Championship back in, what was it, 1950? 1960? Talbot-Vinnick, 1960, something like that?
I think 1960 is right.
Yeah, and so there's some famous, and so talk a little bit, because I think it's just instructive for the members, one, to be shocked that I actually remember some sort of important match in history, but also for you to apply real knowledge, which is, what is white's compensation here, let's say after e6 and going for a line like this with queen takes d4?
You say instead of going e6, right?
Yeah, black has also had lines where they try to take d4 after e6. Isn't that right? Taking on e4, or is that not as good?
They can try that, but the issue generally is that if they, after h3 there, you're forcing the bishop first, right? So you could take back on e4 with the queen and thus protect the d4.
Right.
So if you're going to do that, you generally do it before playing e6. But again, that costs you a move in development, right? So your bishop on f8 is still stuck back there. So I think that, especially in human chess, there are some variations, some openings where you you kind of accept the gambit, right? Mm-hmm. We saw a Botvinnik. We saw, speaking of Botvinnik, we saw the Botvinnik. We see in Catalan games where black kind of holds on to that pawn, but white gets rapid development and great piece play for that pawn. In this particular variation, I think that black is so far behind in development that moves like I said, c3 and bishop c4 and things like that come so quickly and so naturally, whereas every single move needs to be very much considered for black. And with the time, using clock in a tournament play, I mean, you're going to be in time trouble instantly. So I just think objectively it's good for white, and practically speaking, it's also good for white.
Okay, well, now they're playing a position that is close to some theory, I think, that's been played before with G4 being played. And you've highlighted well a nice positional point that one of the things about this structure, everybody, if you take a close look at it, it's really a French pawn structure for both black and white, right? You've got this pawn chain facing toward the queen side, which means that black is going to strive for c5 and then bring the knight out and try to undermine the d4 pawn like we've seen so many times. But the big difference is black doesn't have this bad bishop trapped within the pawn structure, which is always a positional nuisance for black. But, okay, what has he lost in the meantime for that, right? You pick your poison. Black has taken away the bad bishop, but has lost some time, right? And white, in a closed position, is happy to be ultra-aggressive on the king's side of the board. He's likely going to look to castle long so that he's not going to regret these pawn advances. And so, you know, it's... You weigh the pros and the cons of different approaches, right? And so what white has here is a nice space advantage. And I think we both tend to prefer white in these types of Caro-Cons.
Yeah, for sure. The spatial advantage is huge. And like you said, normally it is pawn h3 that's being stared at by rook on h8. That worries people. But here, look at black's lack of development. The last move, if you just saw, was queen to c8. What in the world is that? I guess
right.
Black is trying to go b6 and queen a6, or challenges bishop on g5 at some point with bishop d8, something like that, because the only reason why queen c8 makes sense is that c5, which is a move you want to play, is met by queen b5 check in the previous position. So
and the b7 pawn falls, perhaps.
Yeah, something like that, or knight to b5 at the right moment. But I mean, queen c8 is just an odd-looking move. And I guess f6 now is supported because the queen protects e6. So maybe that's a second idea, but just really strange to me. I mean, just
agreed totally, and it'll be interesting to see bishop a5. Okay, now is black really going to give up that dark square bishop? We'll find out when we come back, but let's jump over to the match between Fire and Boot, which is underway. We have actually a Tarrasch and maybe a Tarrasch where white is once again going to win the d5 pawn early. We'll see if Boot can avoid getting his boot kicked early on in that game. But the game where Boot is white, we have something that would make Sergei Karyakin proud, right? Good old-fashioned Queen's Indian stuff. Queen's Indian, Nimzo Indian stuff. So your thoughts, partner, on where we might go now?
Well, the Fire and Boot are just getting underway. I expect Fire to dominate this matchup. Oh, boy. Look at the game where Fire is white.
Heading there right now.
You're going to be a little upset.
It's the same thing we've seen. So apparently one of the things the Indians do, everybody, if this is your first day watching it, they play a lot of French, okay? They also apparently really like to be aggressive in symmetrical queen's pawn games without their ECOs on. And one of the things about this Tarrasch defense that Robert and I have pointed out is even in top-level grandmaster play with the ECO on, it's a less than ideal approach by black, right? It's kind of a dubious opening. But in these games, they've really emphasized something about the ECO being off, where they emphasize those factors of activity and development over other things, has consistently led to positions like this where white is just winning the pawn early and often. We saw Stockfish just absolutely destroy Boot in this line, and that's why I said we'll see if Boot can avoid getting his boot kicked, but it turns out that's not what we're going to be talking about.
That's very well said, but also I would like to point out that I'm looking at the stats from the games up until round 6, and the QGD, the Tarrasch defense, which is what we have here, has seen 3 games and 3 wins for white. So
yeah, so that speaks for itself.
This to be the 4th win for white, because if we count pawns, right now white is up one of them, and it's not like black is so far ahead in development that it looks, at least, you know, there's no aesthetic benefit for black at the moment. Oh gosh, this upset.
Take a breath,
really,
buddy.
I'm trying to breathe.
It's just frustrating. Remember, none of these engines are your students, so no personal investment. But now this move, knight d4, is nice, everybody. Bishop takes c5, not a possibility, because knight takes e6 and problems. But even if you don't take them, now okay, white takes and simplifies. You're going to watch for this dark square bishop on e3 to head to d4, create a nice blockade, probably with the pawn coming to e3 to follow. And white is just basically sitting pretty with a 3-on-2 advantage on the queen side with little to zero compensation for black to speak of. So it's just, this has been maybe it'll help the developers go back to the drawing board, because one of the things that you and I have talked about, Robert, and we mentioned again yesterday, is that the components that make up the way engines think about chess positions are all these factors that we talk about. Activity, development, king safety, obviously checkmate and material. These are the algorithms, and the reason these engines have different personalities at times is because they're learned or they're taught by their developers to value X, Y, and Z over this. Like Shredder really values attacking king safety or whatever they mess with those algorithms. So something about these approaches to the openings and their emphasis on activity and development as black against d4 has frankly led to some terrible approaches, and black has just been lost out of the opening, right?
Yeah, it's really just baffling for me, just seeing that this happened time and time again, and not just in this opening. You're correct that activity is very much valued by the engine with the black pieces, but again, the pawn, it is a pawn, and yes, you make activity is a kind of abstract thing often, right? It's not tangible. A pawn is tangible, and especially in our play, in human play, you say, okay, I have compensation for the pawn. But where is that compensation? That's one of the hardest things for budding players to understand, is when the right moment is to sacrifice a pawn for the initiative, and exactly how to play with said initiative.
Right.
Because it's not easy. There's no direction saying, okay, this is what I do. But if you're up a pawn, you say, okay, I need to consolidate, make sure I'm well defended, and then I have an extra pawn, and I'll make use of it. So it just doesn't seem like black is getting enough compensation for the pawn that it sacrifices time and time again, but maybe I'll be proven wrong one of these days. Now, Danny, I don't know about you, but no, I'm not feeling 22. But I was going to say the game between Ansax and Chiron, the first one where Ansax is white, looks really interesting, where Ansax has a massive center and the two bishops, but also a heinous-looking bishop on b3 that is just a ginormous pawn for the time being. And it looks like one of those kind of King's Indian type positions where black can consider going knight h5 to g3 check, right? That's like the first thing coming to mind.
Mm-hmm. And you start thinking of Zurich 1953 and amazing wins by black in the King's Indian. But that'll be an interesting thing to see if the computers even go for it, because that horizon effect they have where they're a little biased against material is taken away the more time and the more depth they have, right? But in a fast time control event like this, time is not really something that's a luxury. So sometimes I think you see those ideas that humans recognize really quickly and intuitively, like that knight g3 sack, because it's a pattern, right? We base a lot of our calculation on pattern recognition. The engines may not even consider it with no time, right? Because the depth of it would allow all those engines to really know that's a great idea. Okay, but here, this is not something they're going to miss with no time. H3 is a very nice move, really prying open White's very nice or not, it's exactly the practical move, right? It's trying to pry open White's king side to make some weaknesses. Maybe you'll see knight h4 follow it up. Okay, and that's why g3 was played. Stop that.
Yeah, and g3, I was going to actually even suggest a move ago before rook d1. And the point is that it looks like it really opens up the white king, but the open g file is very valuable, especially with his bishop on b2, spying on this pawn on g7. Again, that looks strange. Bishop b2, pawn g7. Look how many pieces are in the way. Right. But in many lines, when you get to go f4, take on e5 and go f4. And so a4 was played because now c4 is being undermined, right? That the protection of that pawn is really that bishop on b3. And if that can be captured, the pawn c4, then maybe black can swing the queen over to f7 and get some kind of counterplay, especially with this pawn on f3 at target.
Yeah, I agree. But what's interesting is after takes bishop c4, what if White plays a move like queen a3, and it just feels like black's pieces are becoming overburdened. Now you're committed, right, with the bishop on c4. The d6 pawn is now being spied by the queen, and
can you sacrifice the queen with bishop takes e2?
Now you're talking dirty to me. You know how I feel about queen sacks. The issue, I guess, after rook takes c7 is you can't take f3 because my queen does guard it all the way from a3. So
right, that's true. And then d6 is still under attack when the bishop retreats. So,
but we're going to find out. Look at us actually predicting the computer's moves. Queen a3, and we'll see, actually, because now, wow, it just feels like black is losing the thread in this position. I feel like your harshness toward Chiron is deserved here. This is not how you want to play this structure, where black can be all in, potentially, on the king side. When we first joined this game, we were talking about the need for ideas like knight h5 and sack on g3, so you can mate on the h-file. I feel like black is just on total tilt here. I mean, these are just horrible ways you would play this position as black.
Yeah, it's not looking good at all. This is pretty ridiculous at this point because, I mean, look at the position. There's a bishop, two bishops, but the dark sword bishop, which is unopposed, is now in a perfect square. And, yeah, looking bad for sure. And I think all games have started for this round, by the way.
Komodo and Shredder quickly underway. We'll, of course, keep an eye on that. Yet another French and an aggressive line against the French. The one thing you got to give Shredder as white against the French, Robert, he has not gone into the exchange French like everybody else, right? We've seen consistently this classical Al-Johan Chatard type attack. But, okay, the Stockfish Houdini matchup, we're not going to give it a ton of focus in this exact instant because it's just on move 3. But that has to be where we focus because as far as looking at the standings atop of our analysis board, everybody, even if you're just joining us, you know right where we stand. Houdini is in second place against Stockfish heading into this round.
Yep. Before we get to those later games, let's go to Boot with white against Fire. And I'm wondering if Boot is about to go d5 here.
Okay.
And it's a very interesting move. The point is after d5 in Boot versus Fire, that if queen takes d5, white can take with the queen on d5, black has to take with the bishop on d5, and then white goes up in exchange by taking on c8. Now, black will have 2 pawns for set exchange, and we've seen some very interesting games with that imbalance. We saw, was it Fizbo with that epic win in the 2 rooks versus rook and knight ending?
Yeah.
That was really fascinating stuff. But okay, instead of capturing, going d5 and taking the exchange, I guess after bishop b7, queen b6 can go d5 now with the bishop on e7, of course, targeted behind pawn e6. So I don't know how this is going to shake out because after d5, queen takes b7, then d5, then bishop f6, for example. I'm not quite sure that white is getting anything more than equality. So,
yeah, it's strange. I don't see white as having a huge edge here either. But I guess you just deal with this pin if you're black by playing knight f8, guard the e6 pawn, and where's the follow-up coming? Black already has established this 3-on-2 pressure of his own here on the queen side, and hard to imagine a ton. And there's no chances of using the bishop on the long diagonal here on b2 to hit g7 just because there's no squares available to the queen. So I also like Fire.
Yeah, and speaking of Fire, the Fizbo Goal game has some kind of fire on board. The king was just on f3, retreated back to f2.
Love it.
We saw an exchange sacrifice by black, honestly. The rook took on f3, the king went up, and his bishop on b7, it's unopposed, it's on the long diagonal, and that king on f2 is a bit naked. So, Naked and Afraid, isn't that a TV show?
It is, actually, and it also happens to be the title of my autobiography, weirdly. But after Let's talk about that instructive moment because you pointed it out that after bishop f3, rook e3, king f2. Interesting to see who's evaluating this wrong, right? I mean, black is giving up material but saying your king is going to tell the tale, and white's like, I'll take me a rook. We're headed into the ending. So, I don't know. I mean, I really, on a human level, just like black's chances here. I feel super scared, like you said. Naked and afraid is how I feel if I'm the white king, But yeah, this will be a fun one. We're likely to get a decisive result here for sure.
How can Fizbo lose to Goal? I feel like that's not allowed. Is Goal allowed to win games?
Apparently, the jury's still out on that. But I'll get a stat guy to fact check that and get back to you. But if Fizbo doesn't win against Goal, you're right. That's he's going to be a clown. So.
Well, already is a clown, but.
Right. I wonder, can we contact the creators of Fizbo and ask them if that's exactly what they were trying to do, is name it after Cam from the show Modern Family's character? Oh, man. These are the important things.
Agreed.
Look at that, knight g4 check. That is nasty. Not because of queen takes g4, everybody, because that would allow queen takes c3 check. But after the king runs to d2, yeah, here comes queen to d4, and after the king runs again, it feels like black is really in control. King to c2 would allow knight e3 check. That means queen d3 is going to be the only move.
Then knight takes h2.
Exactly. Knight takes h2. Black gets another pawn for the exchange.
And you can't even trade queens there because queen takes d4 runs into knight takes f1 with check, and then you capture the queen. So
he goes for it instantly.
Well.
I'm liking Goal, despite our you and I being Fizbo #1 fan and Fizbo #2 fan. We're both liking Goal's chances here. What about the game where Goal is white against Fizbo? Let's check that out.
It's an outside pass pawn, and backed up by a rook on a4, so that's looking very pleasant for white. But at the same time, black does have the superior pawn structure. You want fewer pawn islands. Black only has one. All 5 pawns are connected to one another. But
Plus,
again, this outside pass pawn is a nice distracting piece.
Plus, this h3 pawn is maybe a target, but look for black to maybe castle in this position and actually flip the rook over to the queen side quickly. That'd be a funny thing to do in an endgame. All right, let's jump back to the games between Stockfish and Houdini. Even though they're a little bit less further along, this really is the marquee matchup that I think most people want to see, given that it is the current fight. 1 and 2 in the standings are right there. So what do we got here in the game where Stockfish is white against Houdini?
Stockfish with white against Houdini. Well, it was a QGD, a Rogozin. So that's Queen's Gambit decline, QGD. And it's one of those positions where black gets an early c5 and then c4 in. And that looks nice in the sense that you've gained space. But if you see, the bishop on f5 is actually well placed. That pawn on c4 can be chiseled away out with an eventual b3 or e4. And right now, black has to capture on d7 with the knight because the knight on f6 is hanging. And white is well ahead in development. So I actually love these positions for white. This is one of those positions where black is black has the 2 bishops, but white is so far ahead in development and can break in the center. And it potentially will have a weak king side once you castle because there's no dark square bishop on g7, despite a fianchetto pawn structure that I like white's chances.
Agreed totally. So let's move on to the game then where Houdini has the right to the first move as white, and see if Houdini can come up with something there, given that white, I think, is even more important as the stronger engines face off. Who has white should have an advantage. This was a Nimzo Indian where white has achieved kind of the dream idea you normally have in this structure, which is the big center. But the problem, everybody, is normally we have this exact same position, but add white a light square bishop right here on d3 and give black his light square bishop back somewhere on one of these 2 diagonals. And the reason that's critical is because if white's ever going to get e5 and really get successful with this attack, you're going to need that light square bishop. Without that light square bishop, instinctively, despite the big center, my first feeling about this is that black is going to be just fine in this Nimzo, Robert. And here comes c5, the positional plan here for black that I played many times in this opening where I play the Nimzo against d4 regularly, is to bring the rook to c8, bring the knight to a5, and just slowly go to work on the weaknesses here on the queen side. And Robert, what are your thoughts? I mean, without white having the real chance of an attack on the king side, I feel like Stockfish is doing just fine here.
I agree with your logic, but I also would say that the trade of the light square bishops means that pawn on c4 is also harder to attack. There are so many lines where you put your knight on a5, bishop on a6, go c5, rook c8, and try to get that pawn on c4. Now, white can choose to go d5 because you don't have to be worried about blocking in your own bishop. So you can go d5, go f4 at some moment, and just try to blast open the king side. I agree with you, though, that this blockade in the pawn on c4 leaves a lot to be desired for white. And so, I would try not to let too much happen, on the queen side and try to push forward on the king side. Of course, that's the natural plan of action.
It's super interesting. And one of the questions we're getting in the chat consistently, and even from our own Peter Dockers here in my private kind of team Slack room here, wondering, what is it about the engines that despite not having the ECOs turned on, that has them, okay, I mean, it's yes and no, right? They played a lot of French openings. We talked about heading into day 3, there were 28 of them, and we've had more. But we've also seen them play and kind of come up with opening theory, right? They've come up with the right ideas in a lot of cases. That's also super fascinating to me that they're able to do this with pure, basically, depth of calculation, which is what the engines do. What do you think about that?
That comes as absolutely no surprise to me, considering that, the top players, right, even in the opening stages of the game, they rely on engine analysis. Mm-hmm. They, not engine analysis in a 15-2 game like the ones we have here, but they leave the engine running all night. They just have the high-power engine going that tells them this is what opening to play and this is how you should play it, essentially, with analysis being checked. With a second, maybe staying up all night looking at the engine and evaluating the position. So it doesn't surprise me at all to see some of the main lines being played. What does surprise me much more is this exchange French, and not just having exchange French, but having decisive games from it. And speaking of games and decisions, Chiron drew Ansax with white, and Fizbo drew Goal with the white pieces. Mm-hmm. That kind of exchange up position. So
I also saw both those, but wasn't too excited about it, as neither of those games really affect our standings. Let's go as we let Houdini and Stockfish kind of battle it out here. Let's talk about the engine that is also tied with Houdini in second place heading into this round. Komodo with the white pieces against Shredder looks to have a typical Komodo type position with a very small, minute positional edge. What are your thoughts on this game where Komodo's white against Shredder?
Yeah, it's one of those, again, positions where white is aiming to stop black from going e5, and in doing so, it's put f4, which can compromise the white king side. That said, at some point, white can also consider playing for pawn to f5, and that is just going to hammer away at this pawn e6. Now, black seems to be doing quite well because of this rook on d5, and you'd rather have a different piece on that square than a rook, but I will say that this pawn a4 currently is an asset. It prevents white from expanding on the queen side. But in an endgame, let's say all heavy pieces, the queens and the rooks are traded, that pawn on a4 quickly becomes a target, and white's king will come to the center. White will try to pressurize this pawn on a4. So I do like white's position. I think white is slightly better, but I could definitely see the tides turn as white plays a move like g4, go crazy, which might objectively be a good move, but as the depth levels lower and the time on the clock dwindles, it could really end up biting white's position. So
I agree, especially because this rapid time control allows us to talk much more in those human factors, right? Because even if g4 is objectively the best, and we'll see if that's what Komodo chooses to play, without a lot of time on the clock, everyone knows you don't want a naked king when you don't have a lot of time, right? I mean, it's just a difficult position to play, especially when there's so many tactical opportunities. Humans think that way; engines simply do not. Let's see what the engines are thinking about in this game that's even more wild, with yet another exchange sacrifice where Komodo has the black pieces yet again down the exchange. I feel like Komodo has sacrificed the exchange more than every other engine in our event this week, but maybe with good reason. I mean, he's consistently found compensation, though here I'm kind of nervous. I mean, yeah, white goes and grabs that e4 pawn, and I'm doubting a little bit that black has enough here. I guess bishop f5 is coming.
Yeah, but the big problem is, even though bishop f5 is coming, right, it's pinning the knight, or it seems like it's pinning the knight, white can actually just go knight d6 there. Yes, knight f2 will happen at some point, but with knight on d6 hitting the bishop on f5, black doesn't really want to spend a move going bishop g6, so then white can even go h5 there. And so after knight d6, let's say knight f2 check, knight takes f5, knight takes one of the rooks, let's say knight takes h1, white can even just go knight back to d6 and then try to attack the queenside pawn. So I think white is getting into the action first, despite the even material in those circumstances. And yeah, it looks nice. And actually, you might even have other options. Actually, for knight f5, knight h1, there might be like, or after knight f5, knight d1 might be better. Then rook f1 could be somehow a move, because the knight can't come back to e3, because then knight takes e3 protects the rook on f1. So rook f1 is a kind of crazy looking move, but
I like it. I'm loving it. I want more of it, and so does Shredder. This is going to be a huge game here. If Komodo is unable to justify its previous exchange sacrifice against Shredder here, this would be a big reason why Komodo maybe doesn't get back into second place in the standings, because it looks like Shredder is on pace to win this game right now.
Yeah, and king h8, the reason that move is played is to go g6 and not allow some knight h6 check stuff.
Right. Note, everybody, that king c2 doesn't work right now for white because of rook takes f5, and black is saved by the bell. Oh, hashtag 80s sitcom reference. But what does white play now after king h8?
I'm not sure, because at some point you can even consider taking this knight on d1, and the point being that there's some back rank issues and 7th rank issues, right? So rook f6, well, actually now g7 is hanging, so that might just be picked off, and I don't really see a way to defend it.
I feel like there seems to be multiple roads to roam if you're Shredder, because black is totally on the edge here, given that this knight on d1 is trapped, can't escape without knight just taking on e3. So I think white will find a way to win a pawn. What will be interesting is whether white can prove an endgame win here, despite maybe only a 1-pawn advantage. So given that it's so important for the match standings, let's move quickly to the game where Komodo is white and see if he can get, again, anything better. I guess we just talked about this game with the f4 move. Is anything changing about this position, or I guess still seems Still seems okay for black, but white having a small edge still.
Yeah, seems all right. It's kind of one of those complicated positions where at some point the knight might find itself on e5, right? F3, knight f3 to e5, but at the same time the black knight will come to d5, which will be quite annoying to deal with as well. So at some point, white can also try to go for queen g3 was just played. I was going to say white can try to go for an attack and start with f5, which may sacrifice a pawn at some moments, but open up some lines. I don't know. I tend to think that for the time being, white is a little bit better, but it's just an awkward position. Rook h5, like that is.
That's maintaining the lift, right? The rook is sort of playing out of his league here, extended in front of the pawn structure, and usually that's risky, but engines don't think about it in those terms. Komodo is just sort of shuffling his bishop back and forth right now. I don't see a lot of excitement. Again, everybody following the standings, we had a couple more results. Ansax and Chiron drew their other game as well, and Fizbo and Goal also drew. So it seems that the computers that are out of the running for the top three in the standings are pulling the old Russian Grandmaster out of the running and just taking draws. Not a lot of decisive results there on the lower board, so we'll focus where we are.
Well, fire actually versus boot, where fire is white, is getting a bit interesting.
Okay, I'm there.
Actually, both their games, but with fire is white, it is a rook and bishop ending where white's pawn is clearly far more advanced, but black is actually up a pawn, and the h pawn can be used as a distraction at any moment.
But I was going to say, here comes e4, though. I was highlighting on the board as you were giving that line. It feels like e4 is just going to force the issue. And white's going to be the only one who can win, right? You're gonna block the bishop from guarding the a8 square and eventually get a queen.
Right, but bishop trade on e4, rook takes e4, h5. I'll sack my rook on a7. It feels like the position has to be a draw with the white king so far away. Yeah, this is definitely a draw.
I don't know though, really. I don't think so. I think this is one of those positions where the black king is not going to be able to properly shoulder the king, because you've said it yourself, right? It's not the quantity of pawns, it's the quality of pawns, and I think white's winning in this kind of endgame, precisely because he didn't have the king on a8 versus a7, because this diagonal from a7 to f2 is going to be key. In these positions, everybody, you don't want to actually push the h-pawn. You want to push the pawn that's closer to the king, because your goal, if you can move it as fast, would be to shoulder the king, to shoulder the white king and keep him from getting back in. And I feel like that's not a possibility here, that black is going to lose.
Well, so rook h8 was played f5, so take on h7, king e3.
No, I think king b6 first.
Okay, king b6, king e3, you're right. Taking on h7 would be a huge blunder because of waste of time.
And now you check, and again, you don't even care about the h-pawn here. You're just going to do everything you can to make sure that your white king can get, and that's why king d4 is right, because it tries to shoulder away the white king.
But rook f8, king e4 has to play the king c5.
Yep, f4, and then again it'll be rook e8 check, followed by king to d4, and I think white.
After rook e8 check, you go king d3, right? You keep the king shouldered.
Ah, okay, yeah.
King a5.
Look at that, king a5. What? That's weird. Maybe that is a sign that the king couldn't get back in via the shouldering, or it's a sign that white just calculated a win. How? Yeah, what problem book win is that? Seriously, can I give this position to students with the king on e4 and say white to play and win, and the move is king a5 to avoid the shouldering?
But it doesn't really avoid it. It's just bizarre. I mean, I feel like king c5 probably was also winning then. Just this is fancy, right?
This is, like you said, it's just the engine's choosing the weirdest road to victory.
Right. Let's see. What are some...
Wow. Well, I still think that's really instructive endgame, because like you said, I mean, even we were calculating it together, and this is exactly the type of endgame, everybody, that is really difficult for humans to play, because you have a position that's a pure race with one rook versus two pawns. But I lost an endgame in a Title Tuesday, Robert, to Georg Meyer that was very similar to this, where I thought I was drawing with the king and pawn, and I lost to the king and rook. And anyway, that was actually one of the moments where I ended up studying a whole bunch of these endgames and basically figuring out that I knew zero about them. And that was kind of so I think that a game like that, and you look at these endgames, I feel like I've become a lot more familiar with the idea that the white king can find a way to wiggle its way in front a lot of the time. because I lost a game to Georg Meyer, which reminds me, this game reminds me pretty much exactly of that. Yeah, white's just winning now. All right, so what else is going on?
Well, Stockfish and Houdini are still battling it out. Where Houdini is white, the position is very closed, and I don't know. I don't see any means of breaking through in that one. It looks like both sides went through the typical plan. White expanded on the king side. Black is kind of fake threatening to expose the weakened white queen side. But yeah,
look at this. Yeah, this is. How often does the king walk behind the pawns that are extended on the king side, right? LOL. Lol.
There's just no way that I see to make any progress. Both sides are shuffling around.
Yeah.
And it seems like it's just equal.
Yeah.
But where Stockfish is white, on the other hand, the position is definitely much more complicated. White is right now, down a pawn for this millisecond, but A7 and F7 are falling, but there is that passed pawn on C4. I do like the bishop over the knight, so I would.
Which game are we talking about now?
Stockfish white against Houdini.
Okay, got it. Ooh,
it just looks like white is ahead, right?
Yep, yeah, white's just going to take this one. Don't be surprised if black gets mated somehow, although the evaluation, even according to our own Stockfish, is very, very close to equal. So what is it about this position that is unstable for white? I guess it's exactly that. He played E6. I think you and I were thinking maybe white plays moves like rook F6 and tries to keep like a mating net against the king, or what were you thinking?
Yeah, rook F6 check looked totally reasonable, but I guess king H5 is somehow really annoying. Because as a rook F6, king H5, now your bishop on H4 is under attack.
Yeah.
If you go bishop E3, then knight E4 comes in with the tempo.
So maybe that was a key point.
The C pawn is really frustrating to deal with. So bishop E7 now is cutting off the rook from attacking the E6 pawn, but now your pieces are in very weird places.
Yeah.
So
I think you're right, and I think one of the key points was that perhaps if rook F6 check, king H5, as you said, the bishop's under attack, and a move like rook A6, threatening checkmate, if the king takes the bishop, is met by rook B6. Black just creates a guerrilla tactic there right in the middle of the warfare, and probably black is just better because of this bishop. So you're right, and it looks like maybe this is not going to be consolidatable. Is consolidatable a word for Stockfish?
Probably not.
Probably.
We'll allow it.
Probably. I'll allow it. Judge's ruling, we'll get back to you on that. But all right, rook F6 check. Okay, so if Houdini holds this one, but Stockfish already won or was on pace to win. No, the other game was the Nimzo. That's right. We were looking at the rook ending. That was crazy, but and Fire did go on to beat Boot in that rook ending, and Fire also won with black, by the way. So Fire takes a 2-0 victory over Boot, by the way, which moves him up in the standings to 10 points.
Yeah. I'm very confused about what Houdini is doing in this game, though.
Which one?
The one where Houdini's black and the kings are now on H5.
Yeah.
Because can't at some point you take on G5, go E7, take on A7 or D5, depending on what you allow, and maybe the C pawn is that fast, but something looks very off about this position.
No comment. I plead the fifth. I don't know. I agree. The king on H5, though, despite the really bad looking stance, I mean, are we about to see a little tickle here? A little back and forth?
I guess so. I guess it's just somehow equal. It's one of those positions where the material is even. It doesn't feel that way.
Right.
But it is. And the back and forth seems to... Oh, and the rook F3 played now, though.
Okay. Stockfish's contempt. Stockfish plays like he knows he's the best. There I am, anthropomorphizing.
Oh, look at that. Look at that. That's what happens. I was wondering why you can't just attack the knight, but after rook E6, rook C, rook F6, attacking the bishop, and a perpetual check, rook F2, rook F1. Wow, H4.
H4. Is that the move that saves the day for Stockfish and keeps a win alive? Look at that horizon effect. The evaluation by the Stockfish on our cloud, Robert, had the advantage much lower but the Stockfish that's hooked up to the Amazon server, which is actually playing this game against Houdini, saw an idea that perhaps that other Stockfish missed because all of a sudden the evaluation is jumping way up to white winning.
Like normally you'd use this expression to demean white's play, that white is playing checkers while
Right.
black is playing chess. But actually the playing checkers here is really awesome because
Right.
you've forced the king up into the open. Now rook h3 check is going to be really annoying at some moment. You still have a bishop. And, I mean, this game, I'm not convinced it's won, but it looks like it's definitely on that path because you don't have that many pawns left. So rook takes f4.
You can't take f4 because of bishop e7.
No, bishop e7, rook f2 check, rook f1 check.
Oh, that's a draw. Okay, yeah. But
rook h3 check, king g4, and then rook g3 check.
And trade, yeah. And if anybody can win, it's white. It may not be winning, like you said, because black has a whole lot of pawns. But white has the extra piece. Something tells me.
No, rook a2 here, right? Yep, there it is.
Oh, there it is. And you can't take f8.
Because rook g2 check, rook f2 check. So that was...
That's the idea. That's the depth that the Stockfish on the server saw, and he's going to go on to win. Seriously, Robert, that was the...
Although, I mean, I would imagine that white is winning this game, but the problem is you're ending up with a very passive bishop. And so having two rooks on the board each really helps white. I think if you just had one rook, that it's actually hard to win because the bishop is tied down in the c pawn, of course. But this looks very, very good for white now. Oh, well, I guess I'm talking to myself, it sounds like, which is, I guess, what people think I do anyway. But, yeah, I'll just keep talking while you fix that issue. Yeah, I mean, now black is toast because white is just gobbling up the pawns. The king has been pushed back to g7. There's definitely no perpetual check. Even rook g2 check here does nothing. So, a very simple move. Yeah, rook d7 check. You can just gobble up the pawns. It's over.
Yeah, no, he is going on to win. Apologies for that, everybody. Small technical snafu. That's what happens when you're a one-man band, directing, producing, hosting, and commentating. But either way, it's fixed. And what I was saying, unfortunately, my audio was off, was just highlighting that instructive moment where the horizon effect kicked in, everybody. Those of you watching it live on Chess.com server, and you can see the evaluation bar. The move that was missed by our own Stockfish on the cloud that the Stockfish entered in the tournament, a slightly faster server saw, was this move h4 at the end of this line with rook f3 and then the idea to draw the king forward, as Robert was saying, creating that little checkers dynamic. Anyway, amazing stuff. And Stockfish is going to go on to win. Okay, Komodo did draw the game as white versus Deep Shredder, by the way. And he drew the one as black. So Komodo unable to get any full points against Deep Shredder, but he may be helped out right now by Stockfish, because if Stockfish wins the first one as white, and then goes on, as we said, we'll see what happens in that weird Nimzo Indian they have. But if Stockfish wins this game, that'll help Komodo to still be in second place.
Yeah, that the other game is like they're just shuffling back and forth. No pawn's been moved. It's only moved 45 somehow. Feels like it should be moved like 120. No, I mean, seriously, right? It's like I feel like this position has been had for a while. But yeah, this first one with the white pieces is all Stockfishes. It means it has to be over. There can't be a way to hold this, especially now with his king on f5 and only one, not even a pawn for the piece. Yeah, this is dead.
Yeah.
I don't know. I see nothing.
I also see nothing. I also see ghosts. It's weird. But
that's a good movie with Patrick Swayze and Whoopi Goldberg, right?
I was actually talking about Haley Joel Osment and Bruce Willis, but both will work for the time being. So I'll give that one to you.
All right. I mean, we could throw some. I was just trying to throw some Demi Moore into the action. You know,
There's nothing wrong with Demi Moore. There's nothing wrong with Patrick Swayze either, the late and great. Nothing wrong with Whoopi Goldberg. I'm just saying that I was talking about Haley Joel. Where is Haley Joel, by the way? What happened to that kid?
I don't know. Good question.
Yeah. Did he go Hollywood young star route? You know?
Yeah, I know what you're saying. I can't answer that. Wait, what just happened in this game?
Black found the crazy potential for a stalemate idea. No, he didn't. He's just down a rook. LOL. All right, so that means Stockfish is going to win this game. So it's really coming down. Stockfish may be out of reach for Komodo in the next round, right? He may get himself 3 full points up if he wins this game, he'd be at 13.5 to Komodo's current 11.5. So let's focus on this game here where Houdini is white, because really it's all coming down to what looks to be the most long drawn-out rook shuffle of all time.
They're not going to move a pawn. I feel like there's no pawn.
Are they going to reach a 50 move roll with a million pawns on the board? They won't, because of the pure contempt that we know Stockfish has for draws.
But so we're going to have to watch rook shuffle back and forth.
Yep.
This is worse than watching the Super Bowl shuffle.
Yeah. Whatever happened to the Super Bowl shuffle? Thanks for that.
That was a hilarious, 1985 or whatever.
Officially, everybody here, if you look at the diagram to your left, Stockfish did win with a fancy double rook. The rook roller, the lawnmower, as it's called in some scholastic chess circles. He did go on to win, but I'm just going to go out on a limb and say Stockfish just clinches the tournament right here. Somehow, some way, he's going to win this game as black. I know that sounds bananas to you, but I don't care because I love bananas. And
I love bananas too. Great for potassium. And prevent cramps,
yep.
But I don't see this happening.
Okay, I think you're going to be wrong, and I love you. And the reason why you're going to be wrong, it has nothing to do with love here, though, Robert. All right.
Actually, now I agree. I stopped peeking at the board.
Yeah, I said the reason you're going to be wrong is at some point Houdini's going to allow a pawn trade, and this is what we're seeing here. This is Stockfish 101. This is how he beat Nakamura, right? Just goes to Grindtown, again, the PG kind, and you're going to witness greatness right now, Robert. Get used to it.
I feel like I'm watching Magnus Carlsen play, honestly.
Yeah, Stockfish Magnus is.
No, I think White's going to win. White is going to win. Somehow sack on H6.
White's not going to win this.
Knight F5.
It doesn't matter to me. I just don't even know how. I'm calling my shot here. I'm just gonna but maybe I'll be that guy who shoots the 3 and calls his shot and then turns around and walks away like he made it and then he bricks it.
All right, Nick Young. I know what you're saying.
Right. Is that his name, Nick Young?
Yeah, the NBA player who shot the 3, did a little shimmy and then didn't go in.
Right.
Yeah. So,
okay. Well, you're right. The evaluation is sliding White's into White's favor, but.
No, White is going to win this game.
You know what happened there was they shuffled forever in a weird practical decision because neither side wanted to break. Time pressure set in, and
Danny,
now
E5 is going to come for White, and then sacking on H6, and there's going to be Queen G6 check, and this is going to be over.
Okay, I love you. Stockfish is going to win the game. I feel like your mother right now. It's not about love. Stockfish is going to win this game.
Okay, don't bring my mom into this. She's watching. I love you, Mom.
We love you, Mom.
But, okay, she's not your mom, too.
She can be my mom if I want her to be, okay?
That's true. She does think you are very entertaining and a handsome young man.
Yeah, at some point, you're right. A sack is likely to blow Stockfish off the board. Maybe I'll be wrong. Maybe I'll be Nick Young. I might have pulled a Nick Young, but... Okay, what's going to happen here on an instructive level? It's hard to keep up with this game. The server is clearly relaying the moves as fast as it can by the computers right now, everybody, because there is very little time left. But now we're back to tickle. Okay, and this kind of tickle is like one of those ones where someone's tickling a spot where okay, it's you laugh because it's polite, right?
Whoa, C5. I was waiting for that to happen.
C5, about time.
He
gets E5, C5, and then E5, and the diagonal is going nuts. The crowd goes wild.
White has to be winning this.
White has to be winning this. All right, Danny went Nick Young.
No, 97.
Oh, my God. Wait a second. What just happened there?
Rook G7 was like the only defensive move, but now, I mean, isn't white up a full rook?
White's just up a full rook. How did that happen? Can we get an instant replay? Okay. C5 was played, followed by E5. And then
It's over.
Knight
It's
G7 was nutty. And it was over. And Stockfish is suffering its first loss of the tournament at the hands of the magician, Houdini.
Can I just say something, Danny? Can we have a conversation, a frank conversation here?
Frank, be frank with me, baby girl. Be frank.
Who called that white was going to win that game?
First of all, I set you up. I gave you the assist to make that call.
No, you didn't.
Yes,
what
I did.
What happened was I saw the pawn structure, H6, F6, G7, D6, C5, B6, A7.
Hold on. Let me back up to analysis so people can learn from Robert Hess again, since Danny's an idiot. All right, here we go. So you saw the pawn structure with H6, G7, F6. Continue.
Right. So what happened here is that black is stuck with lots of pawns and dark squares.
Correct.
White, on the other hand, is infiltrating, right? The knight is on F5. At some point, I was saying when the queen is on D3, there's going to be some kind of idea with, going E5 and just shattering open the position, and then the king can't remain on H7. What the engine did was a very timely first C5 break, which came unexpectedly, quite honestly. The reason behind the C5 break was that, firstly, the queen on A4 has 0 moves. I think that was something that I was trying to point out, but they were moving so fast I didn't have time. And so the queen on A4 is trapped, but C5 removes the pawn from D6 from protecting E5. So essentially, you're giving up a pawn to remove the guard.
I'm highlighting your words like poetry right now. This is just, I'm glad you can't see what's going on actually physically in my office, because it wouldn't be appropriate. So continue.
Well, C5 removes the guard. The problem is the knight can't capture on C5 because then D6 falls, and then that undermines the protection of the knight on C5 anyway, and everything is just falling apart. Now, after D takes C5 and queen D3, again, this queen on A4 still has no moves to get back into the action. So E5 is a very huge threat. And this idea with bishop B6 and C4 was too little too late, because the open diagonal and knight takes G7 was the final blow. That with the check, the queen's coming into G6. I mean, the knight just took the rook on E8, and black's king had absolutely no defensive resources. So really fantastic and honestly a very important, instructive moment to show how to break open a position that's totally closed, and at the right time, sacking a pawn to remove the guard to push through.
I agree 1,000%. Like I said, it's I'm getting really excited. I'm so excited, and I just can't hide it. But I want to back up and just show again. C5. It's a pawn move, but it's borderline move of the month, right? Chess Center material. I mean, you open and remove the defender to make sure that you can break through with E5. And it's funny about this whole game. Thank God we didn't focus on this game the whole time, because we would have been bored out of our minds. As I said, one of the most epic rook shuffles of all time was going down here, everybody. This was just silly. But what's funny is, does Houdini expose like a potential weakness of Stockfish in this game? I mean, right? You've got this situation where Houdini plays this sort of, like I said, we got shuffle puck going on here. Mighty Ducks are on the ice, and it's just he basically waits until he can break through. And like you highlighted so well, the queen on A4, not in the direction that it needs to be over here on the king side to defend. And okay, all jokes aside I was making, where I just predicted Stockfish would win, this was really a sort of a masterful effort, and kind of the kind of thing that exposes a rare type of misplay by Stockfish, where it underestimates or overestimates a space advantage. Because while white was shuffling, Robert, black is also shuffling, right? I mean, neither side is doing anything. And that's a bad sign if you shuffle and then end up going on to get crushed like that as soon as the breakthroughs start happening, right? Once moves like F4 eventually do get played. Wow, this was gross, by the way, the amount of shuffle moves they played. I'm going through the game right now. This is just so stupid. But eventually, somehow they avoided a 3-move repetition. I have zero clue how. But eventually, a breakthrough happened, and Stockfish was shown to be on the wrong side.
Danny, the way I would frame it is that the side, when there's a lot of shuffling, the side with more space is at an advantage.
Totally.
Because, I mean, yet in some ways it's just easier to be the side with less space. You just have to shuffle. You have no choice. And with more space in a human level, you're like, oh, when can I make this breakthrough? When can I do it? Engines don't have these thought processes. But the matter of fact is, at a critical moment, clearly the engine overlooked something. It was playing on the increment, 15-minute, 2-second increment. Obviously, all the minutes were used up. And so at that moment, it was about the idea of breaking through, overlooked, or just maybe unstoppable at a certain point by black, and white crashed the party.
And it's interesting, too, about the dynamic of the event, everybody. By the way, we're not avoiding any of their games. The standings you see there directly above the analysis board are the live standings. Komodo and Houdini do remain tied for second because Houdini came through with such a huge win there against Stockfish. But again, we're not qualified to evaluate what a potential weakness is of Stockfish, right? I mean, I don't see things in the form of the Matrix, despite what you see. I don't know what to say, but I feel like this is the one recipe where we've seen computers overestimate or underestimate, something about the space advantage there, because that kind of shuffle is something you only see computers do. And the only reason Houdini had to play F4, by the way, is because of the contempt factor that we have in the format, right? The fact that we don't allow them to take draws, we would, they are, yes, draws happen, but it's set up in such a way that, those types of repetitions and 50 move rules should be avoided if possible. And that's the only thing that kind of forced Houdini's hand to do something that he didn't want to do, but then he goes on to win and beat Stockfish. I don't know if I'm making any sense right now.
No, you're making perfect sense, but I actually think that having contempt on really replicates a human experience. For example, that is a very plausible game between either two grandmasters, or let's say, I think to emphasize,
minus the 40 moves of rook shuffling. Yes, once F4 was played, it's a very plausible game, right?
Agreed, but let's say the grandmaster versus a slightly lower rated player, let's say an international master, whatever it is. The point is that the player with white wants to win. They see that they have a spatial advantage, that maybe they can crash through, and then they're shuffling around. They see what's going on, and it's really important. You always have to keep your eye on threats. And what I was highlighting even during the game was a lot of weak white squares, right? There was a knight on F5. All of black's pawns were on dark squares. I mean, there was the Swiss cheese across the board. And finally, crashing through. I mean, that was an extremely instructive game. I can't stress that enough.
First of all, I love that you took a shot at international master titles. That was brilliant. You did it very quickly. Secondly, I also love that you stole my own Swiss cheese line, because you're right. It is highly appropriate. Hashtag Tom and Jerry. Used to love them on Saturday morning. But you're absolutely right. And I think where I was just being totally crazy biased, because I just assumed Stockfish is God, right, and again, I love the moment you highlighted how much the queen being trapped on the queen side played such a huge difference when white was finally able to manufacture these breakthroughs on the dark squares. And again, we got some shuffle based on the time pressure. Neither side initially wants to break through, but eventually Houdini is forced to realize his own space advantage again with this brilliant play. So, all right, everybody, round 3 is about to begin. Robert and I can't be more excited about what we just saw on the board. Oh, man. Stockfish and Komodo. That is one of the biggest matches remaining. Houdini and Boot. I don't know if we can look up, or if someone can give us some stats on how Komodo did against Boot, because I'm curious how that matchup will go down. If, obviously, Houdini does better against Boot. Sorry, go ahead.
Komodo swept Boot 2-0.
Okay. So if Houdini also sweeps Boot, right, then right now you're looking at the most likely scenario there at the top. As you can see the live standings, likely Houdini leapfrogs Komodo, assuming Komodo is not going to go 2-0 against Stockfish. So we're on the edge of our seats. You can see what the standings were, fans, that we had at the start of this day there with the image on the left. But the live standings have it. Stockfish is definitely moving on to the Superfinal tomorrow morning. That is for sure. The question is, will it be the Magician or the Dragon? I can't wait to find out. And you know what? We won't have to wait very long, because while you and I were salivating, guess who's already started the last round?
Fizbo. And I just want to remind everybody that if there is a tie for second place, then they play immediately after. So we're still here doing commentary on their tie breaks, right?
Oh, really?
I believe that's
the
case.
You know more about our event than I do. I love that. I love how prepared you are. If I could kiss you, I would. It would be one of those kisses that's not awkward, though. Like kind of a Godfather kiss. Like, Fredo, I know it was you. I would say, Robert, I know it was you. That's what I would say.
I like it.
I know it was you.
Do we have to be Godfather? Can we do Carlito's Way? Like, I mean, where
I don't know. Like, do you ever get in one of those awkward moments where you think somebody, it's appropriate to kiss them, because that's kind of what they do. Probably they're European, right? And then you kind of go in, maybe that's what you're doing, oh, hug, and great, and then you're like, oh, that's weird, awkward. How do you handle that awkward moment?
It's happened to me so many times because my roommate's from Argentina, and he's my roommate in college. So Yeah, I didn't know how to handle it because, in the U.S., we don't really do kisses as much. I just learned to roll with it. So
You learn to
you just
roll with
gotta,
it.
sometimes you just gotta mature, Danny. At some time it will happen to you.
You've always learned to roll with it, and that's why I love you. But all right, so here we go. We've got Fire and Chiron going at it. We've got Fizbo and Ansax going at it, getting all those games pulled up here because that's what we do on Chess TV.
I just want to give also a shout out to Wesley So, who looks like he's warming up for his match against Magnus Carlsen here on Chess.com right now.
You're darn right he is. Wesley's been playing a lot. In fact, Wesley has been playing and then also emailing me about potential players who he doesn't believe are playing fairly, which is great because I love closing myself a fair play violator. So that's always fun. All right, where should we go? The Ansax game where Ansax is white against Fizbo seems to be one of the most interesting moments of action here.
Yeah, and actually both of these Fizbo Ansax games are interesting, but yeah, Ansax is white. It was a Caro-Kann.
You're right, I agree. They're both interesting, but okay, whichever one you want.
Of course, it was a Caro-Kann because Fizbo is playing with the black pieces.
Yep.
What's happening right now is that white can recapture on c4 with a knight and then hop that pony into d6.
Boom,
so I love white's position here. More space, the pawn on e5 supports the piece going to d6. Now, in endgames, if those queens get traded, the pawn on e5 can be overextended. So you'll see that the knight on f3 will be tied down to that pawn on e5, and if black can kind of combine attacks on it, it might fall. So in the interim, when the middle game, but with queens on the board especially, that pawn is a huge asset. However, it can really become a lot. Wow, I was not expecting.
I was not. Sorry, I didn't mean to. I was not expecting that at all. I mean, Stockfish wasn't expecting it either. Everybody, give Fizbo some love after this game because he's about to get humiliated once again. He should be castling here. What in the world? You got to castle here and avoid the check and go for exactly what you said. Potentially invite the trade on c5, which might lead to the simplification along the d file, and the e5 pawn is black's best chance at compensation for the weak dark square. Robert just said it brilliantly. We forgot to play the Robert Hess teaching moments jingle. But now knight d6 check is coming, and I think Ansax is going to bring the pain to Fizbo, despite having a C after an S in his name. I don't know who else has a C and an S after their name. What an idiot, right?
It just doesn't make any sense.
That makes no sense, dude. He just allows knight d6 check. Fizbo's
trying to capture the pawn e5, right? So king f8 now, and then pawn e3, knight takes e5, and saying, okay, I got your e5 pawn, but it's not worth what's happening to your king. You're never going to castle because you can't. That is against the rules of chess. Once you move your king, you're what? King e7.
Sorry, I just can't get over the...
What is going on?
Fizbo. I can't get over the picture of Fizbo. I'm sorry. I had to show it again.
It's so good.
I just love it. All right.
So,
well, what about when Fizbo's white? Let's do our best to give the clown some support.
Well, okay. In that game, it looks like Fizbo has compromised black's kingside structure, and there's this knight on a5, right? That knight is kind of stuck there for the time being. But as I was about to say, bishop takes f3, returns the favor, and ruins white's kingside structure. So I hate knights on a5, that's for sure.
Yep.
But I'm not seeing a clear way to take advantage of it because at some point black is going to go a6.
I love how I can read into the emotion in the tone of your voice that you're genuinely frustrated with Fizbo. It's almost like you adopted him as your student, right? A student, not like your regular students, you don't love him quite as much, but you have adopted him and you are in a position to maybe support Fizbo moving forward at this point, right? Is that a fair?
Well, the issue is, when you don't really believe in something and then everyone tells you otherwise and you maybe buy a little stock in it,
right?
And then your stock goes up, right? Because it's got a little good stretch,
right?
And then it just totally plummets, and that is what's happening. Okay, so I'm seeing the dollar signs in my life just get removed from my account.
That's what happens when you trust your friends and make financial advice. Hikaru could have told you that. Never do that. All right, well, let's move on. We have other matches starting. We're all just sitting here on the edge of our seats waiting for the Komodo Stockfish and the Houdini boot matchup. But Goal is taking on Deep Shredder. Here we have the game. They're actually, looks like they're playing, no, not quite the same opening. Shredder going back to the Philidor, which we saw him play in day 2, and Goal playing a Sicilian as black.
Oh, you said Gaul, and I tuned it out. So
Yeah.
I got
Yeah, you blacked out. No, I get it.
let's
You
see.
blacked out.
Yep. Well, the Sicilian is something to note because we have not seen many Sicilians, so that's actually pretty interesting.
Yep.
But it also might be why Gaul is performing so poorly because it plays the Sicilian and it gets crushed. So
That's true. True. I don't know what you got against the Sicilian. I don't know what the Sicilian
I got nothing
ever
against the
did.
Sicilian, a lot against Gaul.
That's right.
And Shredder
I was gonna say,
playing.
you haven't had anything good against the Sicilian since you started your chess career. Bum. Hashtag close Sicilian. Whoa! I just busted out an appropriate zinger. That is hilarious. You've been bouncing from one bad sideline against the Sicilian to another, right? What's your latest flavor of choice? The Alapin? Let me guess.
Danny.
Sorry, I'm killing myself. All right. What do we got here?
On a useful note, instead of making fun of my co-commentator here, I was going to talk about the Philidor defense that Shredder is playing.
Okay.
Remember that game where White just gave up the e4 pawn? Was that Chiron in that game, or was that?
Oh yeah. No, that was Chiron, and you Chiron. They gave you a migraine mid-show. Yeah.
I feel like this could happen again.
Yeah.
Because the engines have been doing the same thing for example, the Tarrasch.
And Goal is right there at the bottom of the standings along with Chiron. So if we had to,
taking a deep breath, I'm trying to breathe. But I'm going to be frustrated when I see that happen again. Just letting everybody know.
The reason that line went like this, we'll just show you on the analysis board here because it's fun when we predict things and we're right because it's rare. Knight f6, knight c3, bishop e7, bishop f4. This was all fine and good by Chiron against Deep Shredder yesterday. Here, the best way for White to play is typically with moves like queen d2, emphasizing a quick development to the queen side and hopefully an attack. We were hoping for that, but instead, what we had was first a weirdly kind of passive move bishop to e2, and then after rook e8 castles, bishop f8, White just gave up the e4 pawn. And Robert, he lost about 5 years on his life yesterday, but we're currently researching weird investments along with Elon Musk on how to give Robert his life back. So I want to give a shout out to Stevie S5, who just clipped a funny moment, maybe a funny moment, not sure, maybe it's an insulting moment toward me, but they tend to be the same thing. Please, fans, if you've never clipped yourself a chess scene, please do some clips for us, share it. Doesn't have to be silliness, can also be educational. Robert, let's get back to some of your greatest teaching moments. Where should we bring this next beautiful part of the program?
Well,
we've got
teaching moment.
We got Fizbo and Ansex are already, like I said, it's like they just don't even care anymore. They're just going for a draw as fast as they can. Russian Grandmaster style.
Well, Ansax has been drawing like every game. I think it's two losses and all the rest have been draws.
Yeah.
Which I don't know what that says for the engine. Is it just like the equalizer? It's the
it drew both games versus Stockfish as well. It's interesting. I mean, I want to get like a round table. I want to have a podcast with all the developers of these engines, right? I mean, it would just be fascinating to me now that we've done so much of seeing how these engines perform in this format.
Okay, speaking of fascinating, Danny, the move G4 in Fizbo and Sachs that was played on move 23 is very interesting, and it's very important. So, H6 was played in response. Black could have just taken a free pawn, right? I think that's the question that everyone must think about. What the heck is G4 when there's a rook that can just snag that pawn off the board? Now, it's determined in that position that the pawn on G4 is not worth the trouble that you get into with the pawn on, let's say, C5 or the pawn on F6. You could play knight E4 immediately or rook G1 and offer an exchange of those rooks and then come back to start making progress on the queen side. So it's going to show that, again, I've said this many times, the quantity of pawns less important than the quality of pawns. And in fact, the knight on A5 still offset and not in good shape. So G4 was an interesting try.
I'm really going to get you a jingle for when Robert Hess has a teaching moment. That was phenomenal. Okay, arugula. That was fantastic. G4, again, as you said, it also, even if it's not taken, it's such a nice positional clamp, right? Holds F5, holds H5, the kind of space-gaining move that a lower-rated player might even, go out of their way to play like H3 to prepare G4, right? When really, tactically, you can get away with it immediately because, as you said, it's a positionally poisoned, not tactically poisoned pawn. And I love that. I think the rooks come to G1 after a trade. You're going to see White really grind out this game. And Awesome stuff. So now, does that mean you're giving white more winning chances here? I still feel like we're seeing the C after the S come with good drawing chances, but I do agree that it was a really instructive moment.
Yeah, I would say definitely good drawing chance, especially because pawn h4 can be taken at some moment. But still, there's going to be some d takes c4 action. Maybe the knight will come into d5. And the king on g7 is a little bit iffy. That's worrying me a little bit. Okay. I don't know exactly where it will end up, but I guess it can hide on h6 at the right time. So, yeah, it should be equal.
Well, speaking of needing to hide at the right time, that might be what's on Boot's mind right now before his last boot kicking. We may need to get Puss in Boots up in this to get some revenge. But what we have here is Houdini right there playing for his life in regards to moving on to the Superfinal, has now started his last round of the day as well. So we'll keep our eyes very closely peeled this direction. The other game I want to talk about is the game between Chiron and Fire, where Chiron is actually white, because I feel like this isn't this an exact, this is like that, what's that famous game, right? The Smyslov game where black plays something like with f5 and forces e5 and then gets c4 and opens up the long diagonal. What is that game that I'm thinking of? You know what I'm talking about?
I know what you're talking about, but I don't actually know the players in that game, but I know exactly what you mean.
It's a positional goal, everybody, in this situation for black to kind of turn the tables on this big center and undermine it and get a grip on the light squares. And famous players. Something about me wants to say Gligoric.
You're asking you're barking up the wrong tree.
Barking up the wrong tree. All right, never mind. Apparently barking up the wrong tree for myself here for years as well. But all right, so what do you think about? So is that game not as interesting as the game where Fire's white against Chiron? We'll check out that real quick. Also,
the game where Fire is white isn't that exciting for the moment, but black is a little bit subdued, which is very frustrating, at least at a human level, because white clearly has a nice spatial advantage. Right? The knight on f4, the bishop on c4 are all better than their counterparts, and particularly the bishop on b2. Right? Like, let's just evaluate the placement of the pieces. Bishop e7, it's a defensive piece defending f6. The bishop on c8 is doing absolutely nothing. The knight on f6 is decent, in fine shape, but not really into the game the way that the knight on f4 is.
And so, look at that move, rook e5.
Yeah, no, this is an excellent move. Firstly, the queen to c5. I don't even know what that move is.
I agree. That was Chiron being Chiron. He pulled a Chiron, and after rook e5, the rook's going to flip to g5 and watch this attack just get nuts. This could be a lot of fun.
At some moment, if you ever go g6, the queen's coming to c3. No, black is definitely going to get mated in this game. I don't have any hesitation saying that. It's a really terrible move. Queen c5 doesn't make sense. Yeah. But I guess it goes to show that black really was not in a great spot to begin with because of the domination of white's pieces. So,
yeah, this is one of those weird ones where there's not really any structural advantages for white, but just purely activity, right? Pure space, pure open lines and pressure, and black didn't have any useful moves. Like, probably the thing to do on a human level instead of queen c5 is moves like knight e8, right, Robert? Then like maybe bishop f6 or something and try to simplify the game, but that's not really in the engine's kind of DNA. And it may end up being something they regret because now white is going to start rolling.
Right.
All right.
Honestly, very, very strange. So I think all the games are now underway. Stockfish Komodo has started. So
there it is. The Big Daddy.
The Big Daddy. I thought that was you.
No, I'm Papa Bear.
Wait, actually, something interesting to keep in mind is Fire has 10 points. I just took a glance at the standings, right?
Right.
So Komodo and Houdini each have 11.5. So somehow Fire wins 2, but Komodo and Houdini each only get half a point out of 2. I don't even know if that's
It's possible for Komodo, but not likely for Houdini, right?
Yeah, Houdini's playing boot, right? So unless something, I mean, that would be ridiculous.
We might have to check boot. Boot did a reboot. He rebooted.
Yes, he rebooted. That was good.
That was good. Hey, I'll be here all week. Tip your waitress. All right. Well, I'm panicked to think that Komodo might also go for a Tarrasch, but something tells me that more experienced engine is not going to choose to play the Tarrasch against Stockfish like so many others have here, overemphasizing the need to strike in the center here. I think Komodo will probably just play knight f6, and we'll get ourselves a good old-fashioned QGD. But as much as this is kind of the critical matchup, let's go back to the games that are a little further along, starting with Houdini's game as White versus Boot. Look at this game.
Houdini versus Boot. So we have a Bogo Indian where...
Gone wrong?
Okay. What?
Bogo Indian gone wrong?
No, well, there's bishop b4 check, bishop back to e7. That seems weird. That doesn't happen in this position, I feel like. That is... Yeah, this is very strange. Okay.
I feel like it is gone wrong because you're not... E4 this early doesn't happen, dude. I mean, now White's going to get E5 here. And
right, and the reason I was thinking about like Catalan structures where you go G3 earlier, and then Black goes bishop B4 check to induce bishop D2 and then retreats. But this position is just really weird because it seems to just give White a tempo. And I guess Black is going to go knight E4 here,
and probably we'll see bishop D3 if I had to guess.
Right, it just looks phenomenal for White.
Yep.
So that's just strange. I don't get it.
I love it. I mean, you like to think, okay, maybe you're getting compensation with the bishop here, everybody, but this is just such a massive lead in development for White. And the potential threats over here on the king side. I really, yeah, and sure enough, Houdini immediately plays bishop D3. So, Boot, as has been for the last couple of days, in serious need of a reboot. What about the game where Boot is White, though, against Houdini? Is that any... Oh, another Botvinnik Slav. That's what I'm talking about.
But it wasn't even like a... It's not even like a Botvinnik... I mean, kind of... It is the same exact structure, but it just... This seems weird.
Yeah. The queen on b6 is awkward. What's the main theory move? I think after knight c3, I think Black can get away with a6. We've seen that played before here. In fact, that
definitely is a potential line where you sacrifice.
Yeah, we saw Komodo do that actually, right?
Yeah, and especially because e4 falls under threat in those lines. But now after this bishop f6, gf6, right? I think White is just trying to play slowly, maybe bishop e2. Eventually, you can eventually try to strike in the center with d5, but it's more of a slower game plan this time around.
Yeah, strange, right? But it's a slower game plan, but to me, a safer edge for White, maybe not. I mean, these positions are always really weird, and I think especially for some of our more beginner audience, because this is about as unbalanced as it gets. You're like, wait, I thought I'm supposed to not double my pawns. I thought I'm supposed to have a safe place for my king as Black. You know, and all the time that Black has wasted winning and then guarding a pawn, White has 3 minor pieces developed for the 1 queen for Black. But all that said, Black is up a pawn, and the bishop pair is the long-term, probably the most dynamic potential advantage in the long term after White's center advantage. So this is just a weird position to try to evaluate, especially when we know the computers are probably going to play this differently than us humans would. But still, something instinctively says I don't like Black's approach as much as I did Komodo's with a6. This move, queen b6, but I don't know.
Yeah, it's one of the positions where I would say, okay, Hikaru play with White against anybody. And I feel like, there's several games of Hikaru's where he's White and he gives up a couple pawns. He's giving his Dingley Ren in the Sinkfield Cup last year is one of them. Yeah. So it just feels like one of those positions where, yes, Black has the 2 bishops, but the Black king is never finding safety. And so White has definitely sufficient compensation.
Yeah. Okay. Go ahead.
I would say backup in Fizbo and Sachs. That's a very interesting endgame right there.
I was just about to suggest that. Look at us being on the same page. I think Fizbo's going to get a win. Look at your clown boy coming through. Maybe not. Maybe I'm wrong. Spoke too soon.
It could be a repetition, right? King C7.
Yeah, King C7, 96 might be forced. Agreed, Town.
And the other Ansax Fizbo game, I know we're jumping around a little bit here. Like that king on h3 of Ansax is not looking very happy.
Ooh. Wowzers.
What is this? Oh, wow. Rook takes b5, runs right into king h5, and you're going to checkmate with g4. So you have to keep going rook h8 check, and it might end up being another rook a8. I guess the same idea of king h5, rook h8 check. You're not getting out of that. So g4 check here.
I mean,
G4
if
check.
it wasn't for the contempt we know that the Indians play with, you would think this might just be a game of tickle. But,
Maybe it is tickle.
what kind of tickle?
Can't tell you on air. In Fire versus Chiron, it looks like white is crashing through first because the knight on h5 is an amazing piece, just about to try to deliver checkmate, and the bishop on c8 is lost. So that is looking good for Fire.
This was the game we talked about with the rook lift. And,
Yep. It looked terrible earlier, now it looks even worse.
Yep, the rook is about to just take on c8. In fact, I was like, why hasn't he done it yet? And before I could get the words out, he does it. Rook takes c8, and it looks like Fire will take down Chiron in the game with black. Does Chiron have a chance to defend in the game where he's white? Let's find out.
Chiron with white has a rook for knight and two pawns.
Yeah.
And all of white's pawns are very weak. So that being said, I don't see any way that white can win, especially with the queens on the board. If the queens get traded, then I could see white pushing forward.
But the main reason you don't like it if the queens are on the board is because white's king may be in danger, right?
Yeah, white's king maybe is vulnerable, and there's no way to really pressurize a pawn. So, like, if you have queen c7, the queen will go back to a3 or b4, and you just have to always be defending things, which is quite a nuisance. But white is definitely better here. I just am not certain, and I don't think it should be winning, but
yeah.
I guess it could be wrong.
Fizbo and Sachs have officially drawn, for the record, in that game where we saw the repetition about to happen on the left. That's just a quick FYI. And on that note, now Ansax and Fizbo in the other game have also just simply played a game of tickle, the appropriate and mentionable kind, and they've also taken a draw. So the Russian Grandmaster Draw Fest continues for some of the bottom boards here, which is just kind of funny. I guess it's just, we know they're not programmed to do that, Robert, so I guess they're just more equal strength, right? Komodo's playing Stockfish on the top end, and you've got Ansax and Fizbo going at it, drawing on the bottom end. Let's go back there to Komodo and Stockfish. Another Komodo game, another IQP fest here in the game where Komodo's white.
Yeah, and you got to like it for white again. I mean, playing against the IQP is just good. I mean, this is a pawn on d5. The rook on d1 is already supporting once this knight moves from d4 to attack this pawn on d5. The one thing that black does have going for it is that the knight on g4 is really annoying, right? It's attacking on e3. If you go knight takes c6, which is always an interesting idea to kind of change the pawn structure, that actually also still looks good for white because it's the pawn. You've disconnected the A and B pawns, so the A7 pawn can become a target as well. So I think knight takes c6 is possible. Maybe there's knight. Oh, it didn't play. So knight c6, knight takes e3. I'm trying to think of an intermezzo. Maybe knight d8. I mean, it's weird, but that way you keep the isolated pawn there and can kind of continue play that way. But
you might be able to just throw the knight e7 check in maybe, and if possible.
Yeah, and maybe knight e5. You have some options there, but I don't know. The b2's hanging as well, so I don't really see how that would be too promising.
Okay. What about the game where the colors are reversed? Stockfish with the first move. Ooh, this edge looks more real and the kind of edge that could really put Komodo in a world of hurt because this d5 pawn, such a clear and obvious positional weakness. Here comes the move knight to b8 by Komodo, opening up the queen to defend it. I mean, there's the one thing you can say about this structure, and let's just talk about it from an educational perspective, is if you're black in these structures and you can hold the d5 pawn and somehow prevent like an e4 break, you do have the pan-off advantage here. It's like a reverse pan-off of Vinnick, and here goes Komodo trying to play a6 and b5. You have a 3-on-2. That's what I'm trying to highlight here. Black has a 3-on-2 pawn majority on the queen side. It's important because, again, every time you're playing middle games like this for yourself, you want to be aware of the right plans, maneuvers, and tactics in the moment, but always have an eye on the bigger picture structure. So if Komodo gets a6 here, and then I think he'll follow up with b5, I think that's coming. It's all going to be, can Komodo hold the d5 pawn and keep e4 at bay without letting white's attack get nutty? And then he could be... Oh, wait, but he's giving up the exchange? What?
Yes, I was going to say, this is actually... I thought you were going to say this. It's very instructive. In this position, what you said is perfect. You don't want to allow e4. And it's not just because of a central break. When you give up an exchange, rooks, we are told, are more valuable than minor pieces. In this position, I do not agree. The point is that the rooks have no open files to work with. If e4 is gotten in, then yes, there's an e file that the rook can work with. So here, black is just expanding on the queen side, making clear progress there. Of course, white has to be better objectively. You're up material, but there's no clear path forward for white. So maybe black can consolidate and coordinate the pieces in a way that really just makes white's advantage obsolete. So in practical human play, I would say this is a very good decision. White had a good opening, looked great, as you noted, and then now had to give up material, black did. And, well, it's an uphill battle for black to be able to hold this.
And b4 is exactly the kind of move that's going to continue that goal of making sure e4 is not a reality. And again, Komodo's sacrificing the exchange. Seriously, maybe Larry Kaufman, I'm going to have a talk with him. I know he's, sits there in his supercomputer, jet engine powered software zone. But the exchange sacks by Komodo, I feel like it's every round, Robert. It's like it's every round. It's insane.
It is.
And and even though we kind of agree that this objectively seemed like the right decision from black to prevent e4, and despite Stockfish, our cloud Stockfish, you can see the evaluation liking white by about plus 0.58, and the main Stockfish playing in the match must like his position or he wouldn't have gone for it. But
speaking of insane, Danny, look at boot versus Houdini, where boot is white. So
yes,
right
sir.
now, black is up a lot of material. But
the
there's
king
a king
is on e7.
And this is just weird. I mean, we noted that the opening was very strange, and that we know the pawn structure, the two bishops, and all that. But right now, with this king out in the open, I have to think that white is better.
It's weird. The amount of material that black has is officially 2 rooks and a minor. And the pawns are about equal. But again, usually in these unbalanced material positions, if you have the much weaker king, despite the points equaling more value for black, right? 2 rooks and a knight are more than a queen if you add them all up in terms of chess points. I agree with Robert. Instinctively, I like white based purely on that factor that black's king is going to be on the run for the rest of the game, and that's where the queen really thrives. I think here comes queen e6 maybe. What a weird and wild game. Queen e8 first. I guess maybe he'll play queen f7 and go gobble the f6 pawn now. But okay, what's the reverse of that, right? We talked about the king being weak, Robert, and the queen being favored in those positions. But if black does coordinate, what ends up happening, right? The 2 rooks and a minor will almost always enable the outplay the queen if they do all get working together. So we'll see if black can pull that off.
Right, it's a huge material edge for black. It just feels like the king's safety is not really ever going to happen.
Is he going to sack his rook on h8 after queen f6? Is he going to play bishop takes b4 and then king a7?
No, but that would be awesome. Because bishop before queen h8, king a7, just go queen e5 or something. Then my f pawn is also running down the board.
Your f pawn is as fast as my pawns. Me like that idea, bishop takes b4, but again, me also loses a lot, and somehow me is talking in Jar Jar language again.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, of games of note that we should look at, Komodo is white against Stockfish. Komodo has playing against that isolated pawn. It's going to be an end game.
He's doing what Komodo does best. He's not going to lose this endgame as white, right? The question is, can you really beat Stockfish in an endgame like this?
I think the answer is you can. I'm just trying to think from a practically for a second. I guess I don't see it. I mean, the reason why is that you can trade rooks on e8 and give your king a little bit of space, but there's just no real way to make progress, because anytime you go over to a7 with your queen, you're definitely going to be giving up perpetual check. Mm-hmm. And if the queen, for example, rook e8, queen e8, let's say you go h3, you can just go b6 there, because the d5 pawn is immune because queen e1 check takes f2. That is just an easy equalizing mechanism.
Yep, I'm showing the line as you're saying it.
If you go g3 here instead of h3, then something like queen e6. So queen a7 is immune because queen e1 check to e4, and that's another pretty standard drawing.
Maybe not, though, because white would have f3 and then queen f2, but yes.
Yes, you're right. There that would not be as easy, but... Okay, so it's a queen e2 now. So, okay, if you take a7, you take b2. If you take d5, you can either take b2 or go queen e1 check takes f2. So, yeah, this is nothing.
Yeah, expecting this one to be a draw. So if Komodo does get the half point there, the question is, how will he do as black against the legendary fish that has been stocked? That was like a Yoda version.
Boot just made a draw with white, it looks like, against Houdini.
Okay.
The Boot is holding up its end of the bargain, whereas Boot had lost to the others 2-0. There's at least a draw. Sack the knight on b5, and queen b6 to d8 is just a draw by repetition. And
that's high-level drama, by the way, even though this game ended in an ending of it was a peaceful ending, but this queen versus a whole bunch of pieces, really interesting to see that the queen needed to take the perpetual everybody before black could get everybody coordinated. So, all right, well, like you said, Boot is holding up his end of the bargain because Komodo got 2 against it, so we'll see, right? Maybe Komodo won't have to get 2 points against Stockfish.
Right. So right now Komodo is down half a point. What's going on in this Houdini Boot game where Boot is black? So black has the 2 bishops. White has much more space, but at the same time, white could be a little overextended there on the king side. So Boot is putting in some work right now against Houdini. It's trying to stay in the match. I think black is better. I'm concerned about white's position of being overextended. So it's wow, take on e5.
Takes on e5. He's either going to get the f-file or the queenside majority.
Right. So yeah, if you take with a d-pawn, the huge queenside majority, you can go d4 followed by c5 on bishop d7. That doesn't look too pleasant. If you take him with a d-pawn, okay. I guess it's saying that you're actually not getting the queenside push like you want. But again, I value king safety, and white's king does not look particularly safe, especially with his queen spying on the h3 square.
I love how you say, like, I value king safety, like other people don't.
Well, engines don't. I mean, they do, but they don't. They can...
By the way, it looks like a fan or somebody just made a Hess educational jinger. It was made by a viewer. I'm working on getting their Twitch username. So that's why we put calls to action out there, everybody. Make a clip. Make us a Hess jingle. If we end up using your Hess jingle, member, I will tell you will be having a diamond membership for that, so you can bet on that. I can't wait to listen to it. Hess, look at you. Look at you earning some love with the Twitch fans.
I'm just, I'm almost like...
It's hard for them to tell because you always run at a level of red above normal, but you are blushing right now. I can tell because I know you that well.
Well, who gave the jingle?
I don't know. We're looking for a viewer name right now, but look at Boot. I agree with you. Boot is kicking some Boot, right?
I'm rooting for Boot.
Rooting for Boot. Puss in Boots. Fire takes down Chiron with the white pieces, FYI, in the game that we knew he would. The game that involved a crazy rook lift and then eventually a whole bunch of queens and rooks, apparently. The game between Chiron and Fire, where Chiron is white, has become one that officially probably only Fire could win, I think, at this point. But look at the time scramble. Look how fast they move. Okay, Andy Lee DMA. I can't wait to listen to your jingle. I can't do it right now. Really appreciate the love. Thanks for your support. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in today. Please consider subscribing, support our chess channel, and get involved at Chess.com. Really appreciate it.
Okay, I agree. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off with that. I agree with everything you said. Thank you for everyone for watching. But a couple games left here. So firstly, we have the Stockfish Komodo games. Where Komodo white against Stockfish. That game is going to be a draw, I believe, by repetition.
Yep.
That's like a reasonable conclusion.
Yeah, but this exchange set game is crazy.
Yeah, with Stockfish is white, after we saw it giving up the exchange on f8, the b pawn is on b4. And look at those knights in a3 and c3. They make sure that the rooks cannot move. Right, the rook on b2 can't go to a2, it can't go to c2. From b2, it's just staring into a brick wall because the pawn on b4 is protected with the bishop on f8. So to my eyes, I mean, if anything, black is doing pretty well. Yes, there's extra material here, but what is white going to do with it? I mean, what's that knight on f1? Where's that going? It can't go anywhere at the moment. It can try to go knight d2, move the bishop, try to go knight b3. That's a long story. It's not going to happen. So I'm really liking starting to like Black's position more and more.
It's amazing. Again, Komodo with another exchange sack, having this reputation as being the most super GM-like type of engine, right? Komodo, whereas Stockfish, I think, is known as the most powerful brute force calculator. Komodo has this sort of positional sixth sense, right? I mean, that's been its reputation for maneuvering and plans. And if Komodo can take down Stockfish as Black, that would be amazing. It's still hard to imagine Black winning, and you can see that our own Stockfish still likes White because he's up the exchange, but I agree with you. I mean, this is a position where, on a human level, you would think Magnus Carlsen is playing Black and just about to outplay somebody here. This is how it feels.
Right. And speaking of outplaying somebody, let's go over to Houdini White against Boot, because the only other important game. Reminder to everybody that Houdini and Komodo are tied right now,
currently,
as you can see in the live standings. Sorry, Komodo, they entered tied.
No, they are tied now. They have drawn. Komodo and Stockfish drew the other game. You're right.
Right.
Both
So they
at
are
12.
in fact tied. I was correct. And Houdini's White against Boot, but Boot is putting up great resistance here, and I'm not sure. I mean, it's such a weird position. At some point, Black can consider when Bishop E6. Let's say consider shooting over to the A file. I'm going Rook A7 to A2 or Rook A8 to A2. Not sure which one is better. This Knight on G2 is quite passive, but maybe necessary. Can't Black go C5, C4?
I was just going to say, the thing that's highlighted for me is that Black has managed to blockade White's light squares over here with F5, G4, and H5, but has White done the same? I mean, here comes C5 and C4, and I also agree that, you know, we're thinking. I mean, the one thing we saw Houdini do last game against Stockfish, right? Manufacture a brilliant breakthrough on the king side. So he's got enough pawns to do that, being he, there I go anthropomorphizing and saying it correctly. But I just don't see the breakthrough here like it existed in the last game, right? I don't see Houdini making any one of these breakthroughs work, you know?
Right. No, I don't either. And speaking of not seeing any breakthroughs work, in Stockfish versus Komodo, sorry to jump around so much, but in that game, it looks like there's been a few moves repeated, Knight C4 to A3 and back.
Oh, man.
It looks like, I mean, it makes sense, right? I do not see any way possible for White to make progress. It went Rook to C1 now, so I guess White is trying to do something. So I guess we should, we got to hop back and forth between these two games. And
yeah, everything is on the line right here. I mean, if Houdini or Komodo finish a half a point ahead of the other, the Superfinal is clinched. If they have a tie, what is the rules to that? You have the rule. What is the rules on a tie? What happens?
All I know is that they play tiebreakers immediately after this.
Okay.
What those tiebreakers are, I'm
gonna ask our my assistants here, Pete and Norm, to give me some of that info. What's going on with the tie today? People drawing.
They play one set of two simultaneous 15 2+2 second elimination games between engines in the same number of points. And if ties remain, they'll settle by individual sets of 1 minute plus 2 second increment games. Dang, that's awesome. So we might get down into like bullet engine chess. So first it's a match of 15-2. If that's still tied, then as I said, 1 plus 2. So 1 minute plus 2 second increment. That's crazy.
Yep,
but what else is getting crazy in both of these games? Because
it's not going to be a draw anymore. The full justification of the sacrifice is on after this move Bishop A6. Watch out, right? Hide your rooks, dads. Here comes Knight E2 check.
But if I just move my king, like King F2 or King H1...
You'd like to think that, wouldn't you, Robert?
I'm just trying to get out of the way.
I mean, don't be defensive, but yeah. If King H1, what do we have here?
At some point, even like a move like Bishop C4 could be tempting because you're
trying to force the exchange and get a couple of passers.
Yeah, I mean, this pawn on B4 is so strong. It's just protecting both knights. At some point, it's going to be a clear pass pawn.
Something about the dynamics of White's kingside feel even weaker, though. With the light square bishop maybe heading into E2, you've got H3 coming. I just feel this. I feel this heat. I feel this heat on F3.
Speaking of a weak kingside and heat, let's go over to the Houdini boot game, because that's an open H file, and that's a king on H8 that might fall victim to a vicious attack. I don't really like Black's position anymore. I mean, I guess the king on g3 does blockade a second piece from going over to the h file, but there's something very strange about this position.
Yeah, he did manage to get some sort of weird breakthrough, and with the king being on g3, maybe there's potentials for f5, maybe? Tickle. It's tickle.
Are they going to do a repetition, bishop e6, rook c1, bishop d7? That'd be kind of
Something
crazy.
tells me no. I think Houdini is better here now, but it's one of those positions where he's better, but if you push too hard, that king on g3 looks just super exposed. Not as critical for the tournament standings, but Chiron and Fire is officially in the books, everybody. Another draw for Fire. Keeps him performing well. You got to be happy if you're Fire. You didn't break into the top 3, but you really separated yourself from the other, 5 or 6 engines in the field. So congratulations to Fire with 11.5 as its final score.
Whoa,
ooh, G5. What? That's a positional no-no.
Yeah, because there's no knight coming into f6.
There's no knight getting to f6, and look at Boot immediately going for those light squares after g5. That feels wrong. What is Houdini doing here?
And d4, perhaps just sacrificing a pawn to further open up the board, and they ignored.
What is going on here?
Well, okay, a rook exchange would be good for black because your king is no longer in any danger. So look what white did, just go for the open file. Now, okay, there's still no threat because the queen covers h8, and there's a
but it's like a mating attack coming with queen takes
Whoa.
queen.
Look at rook e1. The point is, if knight e1, then you get a queen. If rook takes e1, you have to.
Yeah, but I feel like black's about to get mated here on the h file after queen c4 check.
So
there's no way rook e1 is happy now. I mean, now he just lost that whole pass pawn, and
yeah, I don't think this was black's exact idea, but at the same time, the pawn structure, right, with e5, f4, g5, hard to ever create a pass pawn. Yes, the knight can come to d4 at the right moment. That would be good for white. But with the king on g3, no, okay, now it's the second pawn. This is bad. This is really bad.
Yeah, something has gone wrong for Boot, which means something is going to go right for Houdini as he gets this win.
Yeah, that's 3 pawns. This is over. I mean, queen takes e6 now is just game over.
Very, very likely Houdini is moving on to the Superfinal. Let's go back to Stockfish versus Komodo, because now Komodo finds himself in a must-win situation with the black pieces against Stockfish. Those are words that nobody ever wants to hear, right? Must win with the black pieces against Stockfish, but if he has a chance, it's this kind of game. It's this kind of weird, unbalanced game. Man, oh man.
Kind of like black. I mean, the pawn e3 is a target.
Yeah.
I will say that it's not clear to me how black will proceed to get at that pawn. I mean, you can go queen e7 and hit that pawn another time, but then e4 comes. So you always have to be worried about white going e3 to e4. That's an interesting break.
Yeah. Especially when the rooks just desperately want more open lines.
Right.
Okay, well, even a draw at this point being something that eliminates Komodo, you just feel better and better about Houdini's chances. I mean, looking at this game where it's resignable. Obviously, it's a winning king and pawn ending. Everybody on the board to your left, Houdini is just about to take the cake. So, whoa, e4 is played. We're going to find out if it's enough. Right now, Komodo going to get everything he wants as far as the knights and the knights coming together and the queen coming together to attack the white king.
Take the pawn. Look at that. Ignores it.
That's exactly the kind of chess I've been waiting for. No kidding. If e5 was played, then f5 would have come open to the knight, and whoa.
I mean, white is just pushing forward, sacrificing pawns, but
dude, I'm loving Komodo's chances more and more, which would just be amazing. Because again, even our own Stockfish, biased to that type of position, like was really liking white the whole time that you and I felt like black had good human compensation with the exchange sack. But now even our own Stockfish has changed. That black seems to be in the driver's seat here with white's king so naked and afraid.
Yeah, and queen d5 is always going to be a resource because the king on g2 has to move. And now once the king has moved, as it just did, B3. Okay, the points.
B3. I
Queen
love
H6,
B3.
right, Knight F6, right? There's no checkmate. And G5.
Whoa, G5 is played.
It's looking better and better for Black.
That it's just weird. Like the engines are. What? Rook takes G5? That's a thing? Here comes Knight F3 check. And we're going to have just a perpetual.
Wow, that's crazy.
I think Komodo will be eliminated in the match standings right here, right now, as he has to settle on a perpetual and fear that his own king might get checkmated. I don't think there's anything else to do.
Knight G5 is the only way to go. The problem is after Knight takes D4, King F2, there's not another check on the board.
Right.
And Rook H8 check, followed by Queen H6, Queen G7 is a typical checkmate idea. And so, yeah, Knight F3, Knight G5 is the only way to...
and the reason it's a draw, everybody, is White can't run to F2 because Knight takes H3 is a fork, and White can't run to F1 because then we have, well, among other things, even Queen to B5 check. No, I guess not. But Queen H1 check is also a big attack. So we're just going to see a draw here.
Wow.
Oh, my gosh. Houdini making that epic comeback against Boot is a big part of the reason. And then also Komodo, I wonder if there was a win there that Komodo might have found with more time. That attack seems super dangerous for Black.
I mean, where did it all go wrong for Komodo? Where did Houdini get that extra half point from?
Right. Well, I mean, I think you could say a lot of things, right? I mean, Komodo was unable to beat certain engines that Houdini beat. Right. Also, Houdini beat Stockfish. I mean, if you want to say straight up where'd it come from, the half point came because Houdini got a big
split. Remember, Komodo drew both games against Stockfish. It was 1-1. Houdini won one and lost one. I mean, it was more impressive because we saw a win. But where did that half point come from? Who did Houdini sweep that Komodo was unable to? I think it was Goal, actually. I think Komodo gave up a half point to Goal at some point.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating. It was Goal, or was it Chiron? Did Komodo also beat Chiron? But either way, I mean, this is an upset from the perspective that heading in, again, even just looking at the live standings, you can see now the final is officially in the books, folks. All the games are done. Houdini will be moving on to the Superfinal tomorrow morning. I think an upset in many people's eyes, Komodo being the second seed kind of coming in, but it started with a half a point lead for Houdini to start day 3 here, as you can see the standings after day 2, and it remained a half point lead for Houdini. It's interesting. You can ask where it went wrong because ultimately it's a half point. Both engines did well in certain spots and not so great in others, but either way, we're going to have a super final tomorrow that is Stockfish versus Houdini with live coverage beginning at 9 a.m. Pacific time. You and I will be there, Robert, because that's what we do. What else can we tell the fans? I'm a little bit speechless right now about how exciting this last day was.
Yeah, when we saw the best engines matched up against each other, we really had the most fascinating play. We saw Houdini. I mean, that actually, to me, I think was the game of the whole event thus far. Shuffling around for such a long period of time, finally breaking through and giving Stockfish its only defeat. That being said, Komodo almost delivered a second one. So it shows that Stockfish, that looks so invincible throughout the first 2 days, well, it's beatable. So I'm really looking forward to doing the call with you tomorrow, Danny. I mean, I don't know about you, but I could see an upset happening.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen Houdini do it. Houdini has this style there. I mean, if we see another white side of a Nimzo Indian with a lot of space being built over time, I think that sort of misconception or whatever that is about the space being able to be converted at some point into a breakthrough that Houdini was able to do, again, especially because we have a rapid time control, which just pushes these engines to make decisions that maybe they don't always make with all the time on the clock. So, well, there you have it, everybody. This was the game that eliminated Komodo, if you want to call it that. We had a game here that Komodo was on the attack for the last, especially once this E4 breakthrough happened. Komodo was on the attack. I'd be curious to see what deeper, longer things might reveal with these engines under time pressure. But Black was the only one who could win with this potential queen and knight mating net, but it wasn't enough with Stockfish finding the saving idea, rook takes g5, sacrificing the rook with the idea that White can save the day because you can just go back and forth, and somehow White's not getting mated. So that was the repetition that sent Houdini to the Superfinal, my man. And you and I deserve a break.
I completely agree with that. I'm still kind of, just shocked by how that ended up. Boot almost came through. Like, we've been making fun of Boot for a while, but it almost came through to deliver an epic upset in the final round. But unfortunately for Komodo, Boot didn't deliver. It's Houdini and Stockfish going down tomorrow.
And these, they still say the live standings, but they are officially the final standings, everyone. As you can see, Robert summed it up well. Stockfish and Houdini tomorrow morning. Be there or be square. Take time off work. Literally nothing is more important than watching chess online. I don't know if you got that memo or learned that lesson, but I'm here to tell you that is the most important thing in your life. See you tomorrow morning. Robert and I will be there. Have a good night, everybody, and see you then, buddy.